My name is Dr. Elias Varga, glaciologist, climate scientist, and occasional fool for punishment. That last part isn't in any of my official titles, but it should be. I've spent most of my adult life on ice. Arctic sheets, Antarctic shelves, Greenland fjords, chasing the ancient stories frozen in cores of snow that predate the first fire mankind ever lit. Data is my compass, my obsession, my burden. And that obsession is exactly what landed me here, alone at 17,000 feet in the high Himalayas, where even the air seems to resent your lungs for taking it in. The assignment was simple on paper. Check and repair 3 automated weather stations buried along the Rongbuk Glacier's spine. The team that installed them 5 years ago was multinational, but since then funding collapsed, interest waned, and now the responsibility had trickled down to a single, stubborn scientist willing to risk frostbite, hypoxia, and isolation to make sure the machines still whispered their numbers back to satellites orbiting far above. That scientist was me. The helicopter had dropped me off the previous morning on a slab of wind-scoured ice, the pilot giving me a look I've seen before from men and women who ferry people to places they themselves would never stay. A look that says you don't pay me enough to understand why. The chopper shrank into the blue-white void, the sound of its rotors snuffed out by the vast muffling quilt of snow and cloud. Silence pressed in around me, so deep and complete I could hear the quick rhythm of my own blood in my ears. The outpost, a corrugated metal shed half buried in drifts, creaked when I pushed inside. It smelled faintly of kerosene, rust, and mildew. One narrow cot, a desk with an old radio, and stacked crates of supplies filled most of the space. A solar panel and a sputtering fuel generator kept the bare lights flickering. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. And in this altitude, shelter is survival. That night, as I sat huddled over my notebook, noting the condition of the batteries and sensors, something peculiar drew my attention. The wind was constant here, a shrill scream clawing at the seams of the station, but underneath it came another sound, intermittent, low, almost like a voice muffled by snow. At first, I dismissed it as the howl of the gale bending around ridges, the kind of auditory trick mountaineers warn each other about, the mountains speaking in tongues to unsteady minds. But then, when I killed the lamp to conserve fuel and lay staring at the corrugated ceiling, I heard it again. A rhythm, a cadence, almost syllables. Just once, maybe twice, caught in the throat of the wind. Elias. I sat up too quickly, banging my head against the wall. My breath plumed white in the cold air. I told myself it was exhaustion, thin oxygen warping my senses. But the next morning, when I stepped outside to begin the trek toward the first weather station, I froze mid-step. Footprints. The snow around the outpost had been scoured clean by hours of wind, save for a single set of impressions that led from the north ridge directly toward my shelter. Deep prints, heavy, too fresh to be relics of the last expedition years ago. They ended abruptly 10 paces from the door, as if whoever or whatever made them had simply vanished. The rational part of me scrambled for explanations. Drifts collapse, ice breaks, snow fills prints unevenly, but these steps were clean, sharp-edged, and recent. I crouched over them, my knees popping in the cold, and placed my own boot inside one. A perfect fit. Same size, same tread. My boots. I jerked back, pulse hammering. I had not been out here since arriving. I knew that with certainty. So either someone else was wearing boots identical to mine, or something had borrowed the shape of me in the night. I forced myself to move, shouldering my pack and setting off toward the ridgeline. The climb was slow, punishing. The thin air tasted metallic, and each breath burned like dry glass down my throat. The snow squeaked beneath my crampons, and every step sent tiny avalanches cascading down the slopes. I told myself to focus on the work, the station ahead, the data waiting, but the image of those footprints pressed against my mind with the weight of a glacier. 2 hours later, I reached the first station, a slender pole protruding from a mound of snow, sensors half-iced over. I chipped them free with my pick, my hands clumsy in thick gloves. The panel still registered faint readings. I replaced the battery pack, logged the numbers, and was about to turn back when I saw motion in my peripheral vision. A figure. Downslope, maybe 200 yards off, half obscured by blowing snow. Tall, hunched slightly against the wind, trudging along the glacier. I yanked off my goggles and squinted, heart slamming. The figure paused, turned toward me, though at that distance I couldn't see a face. My hand rose instinctively to wave, but the figure raised its arm at the exact same moment, same speed, same angle. The blood drained from my fingers. I staggered backward, nearly dropping my pick. When I blinked against the sting of snow, the slope was empty. Just shifting drifts, an ocean of white. No tracks, no silhouette. I returned to the outpost in half the time it took me to leave, lungs rasping, legs shaking. The door clanged shut behind me, and I collapsed onto the cot, ripping off gloves with trembling hands. My mind screamed for logic, demanded rational explanations, oxygen deprivation, snow blindness, pareidolia. But the cold knot in my gut whispered something else, something I did not want to name yet. That night, the wind sang again, louder, clearer. The voice was unmistakable now, threading through the metal walls like smoke. And it said more than just my name. It said, "Come outside." I didn't sleep after that. The outpost walls were thin as paper, and though I knew steel and insulation separated me from the Himalayan night, it felt as if the cold fingers of the mountain pressed against my ribs with every breath. Each gust of wind carried the phantom syllables again, sometimes stretched and warbled by the gale, sometimes sharp as a whisper in my ear. "Come outside, Elias." By dawn, my head throbbed with a dull ache of altitude sickness and sleeplessness. My rational mind had begun drafting excuses. Hypoxia, sensory distortion, stress. Every mountaineer I'd spoken to before this trip had warned about the tricks thin air plays on the brain. And yet, the footprints remained. When I stepped outside to greet the pale light of morning, they were still there, sharp as if pressed an hour ago, the same pattern leading straight toward my shelter and stopping at nothing. No drift had softened them. No wind had erased them. And I knew the Himalaya well enough to understand that was not natural. I crouched again, my gloved hand hovering over the nearest print. My boot fit inside perfectly, heel to toe, tread to tread. The imprint was mine, but I hadn't walked here. And as I leaned closer, I swore I smelled something on the air. Not snow, not ice, not kerosene fumes from the generator. Something warmer, faintly organic. Like skin. I forced myself to pack quickly for the second station. If I stayed still, I'd unravel. Work was the only tether I had. The ascent to Station 2 was harsher, narrow ridges where snow sloughed away under my weight, black rocks jutting like the spines of a frozen beast. Clouds pressed down so close I felt swallowed, light diffused into a bruised gray haze. The second station loomed out of the mist after 3 grueling hours. Its mast was half collapsed, sensor arms dangling like broken limbs. I set my pack down and began repairs, chipping ice, unscrewing panels with stiff fingers. That's when I heard the crunch of boots behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly toppled into the drift. A man stood not 30 feet away, half veiled by blowing snow. He was dressed in old mountaineer gear, wool layers, a jacket bleached by sun, an ice axe strapped across his back. His beard was rimed with frost, and when he smiled, his teeth flashed too white against the ruin of his face. I staggered a step backward. "Hey," my voice cracked. "Who are you? Are you part of an expedition?" He didn't answer. His lips moved, but no sound reached me, though the gale carried every other noise with merciless clarity. Instead, he took one step closer. His boots sank deep into the snow. Another step. And then I saw it. His gait matched mine. The rhythm of his steps, the way his shoulders rolled, even the angle of his head cocking to the side, as if I were staring into a mirror distorted by time. My heart jackhammered against my ribs. "Stay back," I shouted, fumbling for the pick at my side. The figure's lips curved higher, and then, without a sound, he dissolved into the wind. One moment there, the next gone. I dropped to my knees, clawing at the snow where his prints should have been. Nothing. The surface lay untouched, smooth, except for the shallow depressions of my own boots. Panic clawed at my throat, but I forced myself to finish the repair. Every instinct screamed to run, to abandon this place, but the stubborn scientist in me clung to data, to reason. If I let fear dictate my actions, I'd die faster than the cold could claim me. By the time I returned to the outpost, snow stung my face like shrapnel. I slammed the door shut, bolted it, and leaned against the steel, lungs heaving. I poured water from the melted snow reserve, swallowing gulps that tasted faintly of metal, trying to anchor myself. When I finally looked up, I saw the radio's needle twitching. The equipment was old, half-rusted, powered only intermittently by the solar rig, and in 3 days I hadn't managed to raise a signal. But now the speaker hissed, static, thick as wool. Beneath it, faint but unmistakable, came a voice. "Elias?" The cup slipped from my hand, water spilling across the floor. My knees hit the steel as I crawled closer, pressing my ear to the cracked speaker. Outside. I ripped the plug from the wall, silencing the radio in an instant. My own breath roared in the quiet that followed. No one could be broadcasting on this frequency. No one even knew I was here, save the pilot. And he'd be long gone by now, already ferrying climbers across Nepal. That night, I barricaded the door with crates of supplies. I lit the kerosene lamp and kept it burning, though every survival instinct screamed to conserve fuel. The light made the shadows twitch across the corrugated walls, but I needed it. Without it, the darkness would have a face. Sleep came in fragments, broken by jerks of panic. Once I awoke, certain someone was standing at the foot of my cot. I swung the lamp wildly, but only empty air shimmered back. Another time, I dreamt of trudging through snow, following my own footprints in a circle that never ended. When I woke, I was sitting upright, boots on, pack half-strapped. I hadn't put them on. By the fourth morning, the anxiety had shifted into a colder thing, recognition. Whatever was on this mountain knew me. It knew the sound of my steps, the cut of my boots, the cadence of my breath, and now it was learning more. As I strapped on my pack to reach the third and final station, I caught myself muttering under my breath. Just one more, and then I'm gone. Just one more. My voice sounded small in the stale air. The outpost door groaned when I pulled it open, and I froze on the threshold. The snow outside was laced with prints again. Not one set this time, but many. Circles of them, boots that looked exactly like mine, converging from every direction, closing around the outpost like petals of a frozen flower. And in the center of those circles, one set of prints led away, winding into the white distance, toward the ridge, toward Station 3. I stood on the threshold far too long, the wind gnawing at my exposed skin, until the sting forced me to move. The prints were impossible to deny now, dozens of them circling identical to my own boots. They looked as though I'd been pacing in a frenzy outside all night, wearing grooves into the snow. But I had been locked inside, crates stacked against the door. I pulled the scarf tighter across my mouth, trying to steady my breathing. Fear only wastes oxygen at this altitude, I told myself. Fear doesn't help you climb. But as I stepped into the snow, my boots sinking into the depressions of those impossible tracks, I felt the hollowness of my own reassurance. The third station lay deeper along the glacier, perched near a jagged ridge that caught storms like teeth. I set off, following the lone trail that cut through the circling prints, my pack heavy against my shoulders. Each step seemed to echo unnaturally, as though the sound didn't belong to me. Once or twice I glanced back, half expecting to see another set of impressions forming right behind me. The silence pressed thicker the further I walked. No distant avalanches, no cracking ice, only my breaths, ragged and metallic, and the squeal of crampons on frozen crust. I thought I'd welcome the absence of voices, but the quiet made my nerves howl louder. 2 hours passed before the station came into view, bent nearly double by storms. Its mast leaned at a drunken angle, panels iced over, wires tangled like veins. Relief flickered through me, something solid, something real to focus on. I dropped my pack and trudged closer. That's when I heard it. A second pair of boots, crunching in perfect synchrony with mine. I froze mid-step, listening. The sound stopped too. I shifted my weight slightly, and again, there it was. A fraction of a second behind my own movement, as if a shadow had learned to walk. My stomach tightened into a fist. Slowly, I turned my head. Across the slope, perhaps 50 feet away, a figure trudged toward the station. My figure, my height, my build, even the sway of my pack straps. He moved when I moved, stopped when I stopped. His face was covered by a frost-streaked scarf, goggles fogged opaque, but I didn't need to see his eyes to know the truth. It was me. "Hey!" My voice cracked through the thin air. The figure stopped. My shout bounced off the ridges, returned thinner, strangled. I took one trembling step forward. The figure did the same. Rage and terror surged together, sharpening my thoughts in a way that no calm reasoning could. If it wanted to copy me, then I'd force it to slip. I raised my ice pick, driving it into the snow in front of me, leaving a fresh gouge. My reflection did the same. Then, with deliberate defiance, I dropped to my knees, scooped a chunk of snow, and hurled it off the cliffside. The other me mirrored every move until the snow left my hand. He went through the motion, his arm cocking, his hand opening, but nothing flew from his grasp. The realization left me trembling. It wasn't perfect. It could mimic posture, rhythm, motion, but not substance, not the act. "Who are you?" I croaked. The figure only tilted its head, that slight unnerving angle I'd seen before. Then it dissolved into the blowing snow, fragments scattering like dust in a gale. I stood rooted for what felt like hours before finally forcing myself to the station. My gloves shook as I scraped ice from the panels, replaced the corroded battery. My notes were near illegible, my pencils scrawling across damp paper. Rationality, my oldest ally, was slipping from my grasp, melting like ice in a current. On the return trek, the wind rose, the kind of wind that claws into bones, screeching through crevices in the glacier. And threaded through that wind came voices, not one now, but many. "Elias, come back. You left me." They weren't my voice anymore. They were others. Men, women, tones tinged with desperation, with anger, with grief. Climbers lost to avalanches, mountaineers swallowed by crevasses. I recognized none of them, but the mountain had no shortage of the dead. Each time I quickened my pace, the voices followed. Once, I thought I glimpsed a hand clawing out of the snowdrift beside me, pale fingers writhing. I swung my pick in panic, striking only powder. By the time the outpost's silhouette emerged through the storm, my nerves were threads ready to snap. I stumbled inside, slammed the bolt, and collapsed against the door. My chest heaved, sweat chilling instantly against my skin. The radio hissed. I had unplugged it. I remembered the sharp tug, the silence after. But now, the needle glowed faintly and the speaker crackled. "Don't leave us here." I staggered forward, my shadow jerking wildly across the corrugated walls. The voice was broken, overlapping with others, as if dozens spoke through the same mouth. "Stay. We'll keep you warm. We'll keep you alive." I ripped the wire free again, throwing the plug across the room. The lamp sputtered in its cage, shadows shivering, and in those shadows I swore I saw outlines of people, too many to count, pressed against the thin metal walls, waiting. That night I didn't barricade the door. Somehow I knew it wouldn't matter anymore. I lay on the cot, pick clutched tight across my chest as the wind screamed like 1,000 voices outside. And when I closed my eyes, I dreamed of standing in the snow with my copies. All of us circling the outpost in unison, waiting for the one inside to finally open the door. I woke to silence, the kind of silence so thick it choked the breath from your chest. No wind, no groaning ice, even the hum of the generator had guttered out sometime in the night. The absence of sound was wrong, like stepping into a room where every object is exactly as it should be, but the air itself has been stolen. I lay still on the cot, staring at the corrugated ceiling. My pick was still clenched across my chest, my knuckles pale where the blood had drained from them. Slowly, I sat up, the thin wool blanket sliding to the floor. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Snow and kerosene should have been the only scents in this place, maybe the faint sourness of my own sweat. But the air now carried something warmer, like skin pressed too long against cloth, like exhalation lingering in the cold. It was the smell of a body, not mine. I swung my boots onto the floor. The boards creaked under my weight and then creaked again. A half beat later, as though my echo had taken form and stood up with me. My throat dried to sand. I forced myself to whisper, "Who's there?" The shadows clung to the corners, heavy and immobile. No answer, only the faint hiss of my own blood in my ears. I reached for the lantern, lit the wick with trembling fingers, and raised the light. That was when I saw the condensation. Across the single frost-crusted window, a circle of fog bloomed outward, as if someone outside had pressed their mouth against the glass and breathed. Slowly, purposefully. The pick slipped from my grasp, clattering to the floor. I lunged forward, yanking the blackout curtain across the pane. My breath came fast and shallow. I told myself not to look, but when I dragged the curtain aside, a heartbeat later, the glass was clear. No fog, no shape outside. I slammed the curtain shut again, turned back toward the cot, and froze. There were prints on the floor, wet prints. A pair of boots identical to mine had walked across the boards, straight from the door to where I stood now. I staggered back, my heels slipping against damp wood. The air in the outpost had turned warmer, heavier, as if crowded with bodies I couldn't see. And then a voice. Not from the wind, not from the radio. From inside the room. Elias. It was my voice, the same cadence, the same subtle accent I'd inherited from my father. My voice spoken from the shadow beside the cot. I lifted the lantern with a shaking hand. The light swept the corner, and there I was. Sitting on the cot, boots unlaced, head tilted in that unnerving angle I'd seen before. My goggles reflected the lantern glow like two dead suns. The air punched from my lungs. "You're not real." My words cracked. "You're not me." The figure smiled. My smile. "Then who are you?" The room tilted. My hand tightened around the lantern, the only weapon I had left. "Why are you here?" I rasped. "To keep you," it said simply. "The mountain keeps what comes to it. You know that." Its voice wasn't an echo now. It was stronger, layered with whispers, as though countless mouths spoke through mine. I lunged, hurling the lantern at it. Glass shattered, flame flared against the cot. The figure dissolved in the blaze, snow-pale fragments scattering into the air like ash. The fire licked along the blanket, the wood crackling, and panic snapped me back to survival. I smothered the flames with my jacket, coughing on kerosene smoke. When the fire died, the cot was blackened and warped, but empty. I collapsed against the wall, shaking. My chest heaved with ragged breaths. The silence had returned, heavy and oppressive. My rational mind screamed at me, "You're hallucinating, you're oxygen-starved, you're breaking down." But another part of me, the part that had studied avalanches bury climbers, the part that had read journals of men who vanished in these peaks, knew better. Something was here, and it had worn my face. I couldn't stay inside any longer. Every instinct told me the walls would not hold through another night. I shoved my gear into the pack, fumbling with straps, throwing on layers until sweat prickled under my arms. My hands shook as I loaded spare batteries, my logbook, even the cracked radio. If I was going to leave, I needed evidence, proof, something to show the world this wasn't altitude madness. The moment I cracked the outpost door, the wind returned, screaming, furious, carrying the sting of ice crystals against my face. I staggered into the blinding white, every sense taut. And there they were. Figures in the snow, not one, not two, dozens, all shaped like me, scattered across the slope, some climbing ridges, some crouched in drifts, some standing motionless, staring up at the outpost, their faces hidden behind goggles, scarves, frost, but their bodies moved with my rhythm, my exact rhythm. Every muscle in me locked. My mind screamed, "Run," but where? Down into the valleys, where storms could bury me alive? Up toward peaks where the air would strangle me? One figure stepped forward, then another. Their movements were synchronized, deliberate, each bootfall echoing mine. The snow didn't swallow their prints, and then, in unison, they all tilted their heads to the same angle. My angle. The scream that ripped from my throat was torn away by the gale. I stumbled backward, fumbling for the pick, but the ground beneath me trembled as if alive. Cracks spiderwebbed through the snow, and the sound of splitting ice roared like thunder. The mountain itself seemed to breathe, and in that breath, I knew. The danger wasn't outside me. It had already learned me. It wore me. It walked in my skin. I ran. Not because I thought running would save me. No one outruns the mountain, but because stillness would mean surrender. My boots punched into the snow, each step sinking too deep, each gasp dragging razors into my chest. The storm clawed at me, ripping the scarf from my mouth, stinging my face raw. Behind me, the echoes followed. I didn't dare look at first. I knew what I would see. My own body in 100 variations, moving with the same rhythm, the same desperation, the same lung-burning pace. But the sound betrayed them. The crunch of boots on snow multiplied, surrounding me, closing from every direction. When I risked a glance, my gut collapsed in on itself. They weren't behind me anymore. They were beside me. Running in parallel lines through the storm, goggles flashing with reflected light, their arms pumping, their breaths ragged, all in sync with mine. A twisted parody of solidarity. "Stop!" I screamed, voice breaking against the wind. But of course they didn't stop. How could they? They were only me. The ridge loomed ahead, jagged black rock ripping through snow like broken bone. I scrambled upward, ice pick biting into the crust, hands numb inside my gloves. For a moment, the exertion consumed me, every muscle burning, and when I hauled myself onto the ridge's flat spine, I thought maybe I had left them below. But they were already there. Figures waited at the top, motionless, lined in a crescent that framed my path forward. Their heads tilted in unison, the same mocking angle. And behind me, more of them climbed, moving as I had, steps falling exactly into mine. I staggered back, chest heaving, eyes darting for escape. The ridge narrowed to a knife's edge, sheer drops yawning on either side. A misstep would end me faster than their embrace. One of them stepped forward. He raised a hand, gloved fingers curling. The motion was painfully familiar because it was mine. That nervous tick I'd carried since childhood, wringing my hands when fear gnawed too deep. He did it perfectly. Why? My voice cracked, half sob, half demand. What do you want? The figure cocked its head, then peeled down its scarf. The breath froze in my throat. It was my face, my exact face. Frost crusted in the beard, lips cracked from the cold, eyes red-rimmed and hollow. But when he smiled, the teeth were too many, rows upon rows stretching back into a darkness that had no business inside a human mouth. "Home," it whispered. My voice twisted into something too hungry. "Stay. Stay with us." The others echoed, a chorus rising above the gale. "Stay. Stay. Stay." I staggered back a step, the ridge groaning under my weight. My heart hammered so violently I thought it might burst in my chest. My rational mind, my precious stubborn anchor, fought to piece together answers. Some parasite? Some psychic imprint born of the mountain swallowing countless lives? An intelligence that learned by echo, by mimicry? It didn't matter. Not if I stayed here another heartbeat. I ripped the flare gun from my pack. My hand shook so violently I nearly dropped it, but I leveled it at the line of figures and fired. The flare screamed upward, exploding into red brilliance that painted the glacier in bloody light. For a second, the storm cleared, shadows retreating. The figures froze, their faces warped and ugly in the glow, and then, as the flare sputtered out, they all screamed. Not in pain, in unison. My voice multiplied 100 times, splitting the sky. The sound rattled through my bones, tore through my skull until I dropped the gun and clamped my hands over my ears. When the echoes died, I opened my eyes. The ridge was empty. The storm swallowed every trace of them, except for one. He stood at the far end of the ridge, his back to me, facing the valley below, my exact outline motionless against the void. Slowly, he turned, and though the scarf still covered his face, I knew he was smiling. Then he lifted a hand and beckoned. A surge of nausea rolled through me. My knees nearly gave out. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to flee back to the outpost, to bury myself inside and wait for a helicopter that might never return. But a deeper instinct whispered something worse. If you turn back, he will be waiting there too. The figure beckoned again, then started walking, his boots crunching a steady rhythm toward the far edge of the ridge where the snow gave way to nothing. My breath came ragged. My hands shook at my sides. And still, I followed. because if I didn't, I knew I'd find him at my back anyway. The wind rose as I crept after him, biting my face, clawing my layers. Each step felt like suicide, the drop yawning wider with every glance. My doppelganger walked with certainty, never faltering, never hesitating, until he stopped at the very edge. He turned to face me, tilted his head, and then stepped off. My heart lurched. I lunged forward, ice pick raised, peering over the edge. No body, no fall, only snow churning in the gale. But there were prints, my prints, leading straight down the cliff face as if the snow itself had hardened into a staircase only I could walk. The wind screamed again, carrying a voice with it. My voice. Come home. I stared at those prints too long. Snow stung my eyes until tears froze on my lashes, but I couldn't look away. The trail marched downward into the void, each step a perfect copy of my boots. Not wider than my hand, not cut into rock like a proper climber's route. Just impressions in snow, descending a sheer cliff face as though gravity had lost its claim. My stomach rolled. If I leaned forward too far, I'd follow him. My double, whatever it was, had walked into the storm with the calm of a man returning home, and that word lingered in my skull like a toxin. Home. But this wasn't home. It was the opposite. I stumbled back from the ledge, sucking frozen air deep into my lungs. My pick trembled in my grip. If I went down that way, there would be no return. I knew it with the certainty of death itself. I couldn't explain how, but I knew. Behind me, the ridge stretched back toward the glacier. For a heartbeat, I thought I was alone again. Then I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, gathered along the ridge I had crossed, their shapes hunched against the gale, unmoving, each one of them me. They didn't advance, not yet. They only stood lining the ridge, heads tilted in synchrony. Watching, waiting. The urge to scream boiled in my throat, but I bit it down. Panic was what they wanted. If they fed on anything, it was that. My rational mind tried to assert itself, weak and brittle. They can't all be real. They can't all be you. They're patterns in snow, illusions shaped by the storm. But the storm didn't breathe in perfect rhythm with me. The storm didn't tilt its head when I did. I had one choice left, the outpost. My sanctuary, thin-walled though it was. The helicopter wasn't due back for another 3 days, if it even returned at all. 3 days. I could last 3 days. I had food, water, fuel enough if I rationed. If I barricaded myself inside and resisted their voices, maybe, just maybe, I'd leave this place alive. I turned and ran. The ridge blurred beneath my feet, boots sliding, arms flailing for balance. The figures didn't pursue. They shifted, always at the edges of my sightline, never full in front of me. Some stood above, their outlines cut from snow and cloud. Others crouched below, tracking me like wolves, but none closed the gap. Until I reached the glacier. The flat expanse opened before me, gray under low clouds. The outpost was a dark smudge against the white horizon. Salvation. I pushed forward, lungs tearing with every gasp. Then the snow erupted. Boots burst from the drifts around me. My boots. Arms hooked from beneath the ice. My arms. Faces, half-formed, dragged themselves upward, my goggles reflecting my terror back at me. They clawed free, pulling their bodies from beneath the crust like they had been buried there for years, like waiting. I screamed. My pick swung in wild arcs, smashing into faces that crumbled to frost and smoke. I kicked, thrashed, shoved my way through, my heart a drumbeat in my skull. Each one that fell dissolved, only to rise again a few paces away. The chorus of voices rose. My voice layered 100 times, chanting through the storm. Stay. 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 I barreled toward the outpost, my vision tunneling. My muscles screamed, lactic fire burning through them, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The door loomed closer, closer, until I slammed against it, wrenching the latch open and stumbling inside. The walls rattled under my weight as I bolted it behind me. I collapsed against the steel, body shuddering. My gloves were torn, my knuckles bleeding, though I hadn't felt a thing in the frenzy. And then came the sound. Knocking, soft at first. A rhythm on the metal walls. Knock, knock, knock. Then louder, a pounding from every direction. Dozens of fists, or my fists, hammering the outpost in unison. The ceiling creaked, the floorboards groaned. It was as if the entire structure sat inside a cage of mirrors, each reflection clawing to get in. I pressed my hands over my ears, curling against the door, but the pounding wasn't just outside, it was inside me. In my chest, my skull, my bones. My heartbeat had synchronized with their fists. I forced myself to the desk, fumbling for the radio. My fingers shook as I jammed the plug back into the socket. Static flared, loud and angry. "Mayday," I rasped, voice raw. "This is Dr. Elias Varga at Wrongbook Outpost, 17,000 feet. Anyone, please, respond." The static hissed. For a moment, nothing. Then, "Elias," my stomach turned to ice. The voice that answered was mine. "Don't fight it. You'll never leave. You're already ours." I ripped the cord free again, the silence collapsing around me like a tomb. I staggered back to the cot, trembling. The pounding slowed, then stopped. The sudden quiet was worse than the noise. My ears rang with it, my mind filling the gap with possibilities. Were they still there? Had they gone? Or had they simply stepped inside? The lantern guttered on the desk, flame shrinking, shadows stretched across the warped walls, and one of those shadows moved when I didn't. It leaned forward, tilting its head at that terrible angle. My mouth went dry. I gripped the ice pick, knuckles white, breath shallow. The shadow smiled. The smile in the shadow was wrong. Too wide, too steady. It lingered even when the lantern flame guttered lower, as if it drew its shape from something other than light. My grip on the pick slickened with sweat despite the freezing air. "Get out," I whispered, but my voice didn't sound like mine anymore. It was hoarse, layered with something deeper, almost as if another throat had joined in. The shadow tilted its head, my head, and then it stepped forward, detaching itself from the wall like smoke pulling free from fire. My legs locked. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where? The outpost was a coffin. There was nowhere left to go. It raised a hand, my hand, and pointed at the cot. At first I thought it meant to sit, but then I realized it was inviting me, beckoning me to lie down, to rest. "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "No, I'm not yours." The thing smiled wider. The lantern hissed, flame nearly gone. I lunged, slamming the pick down where its chest should have been. The blade struck only wood, gouging the floorboards. The shadow dissolved into smoke, then reappeared behind me, whispering against my ear. "You already are." My knees buckled. I fell forward, gasping. The air was thick, heavy, every breath filled with the coppery taste of blood. My vision flickered at the edges. Altitude sickness, exhaustion, fear. No, it was more. It was inside. I felt it threading through my pulse, syncing with the rhythm of my heart. I staggered to my feet, ripping open the outpost door. Snow roared in, icy needles flaying my face. The storm had thickened, a swirling white wall that erased everything beyond a few feet. Figures loomed just outside, silhouettes pressed against the gale. They stood in rows, in circles, waiting. All of them me. "Leave me alone," I screamed into the wind. My voice split, echoed back 100-fold. "Leave me alone, leave me alone, leave me alone." But they didn't leave. They stepped closer, their prints stitching perfect patterns in the snow. My patterns. My life written in the language of repetition. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. There was no out, no escape. Not down the glacier, not up the peaks, not within the outpost's paper-thin walls. And then something shifted inside me. Something colder than the storm itself. A realization. They weren't trying to kill me, they were trying to keep me. The thought lodged like ice in my chest, every copy, every whisper, every footprint. They weren't hunting. They were folding me in, pulling me into something vast, ancient, and patient as the mountain itself. They didn't want my death. They wanted my permanence. I backed toward the cliffside ridge, lantern clutched in one hand, pick in the other. The figures parted like a congregation, leaving a path open. Leading me where? Down, into the endless white staircase I had glimpsed before? Or deeper, into them? The wind rose until it roared like a cathedral organ. Through it came the chorus, dozens of my voices speaking in unison. "Stay, stay, stay." My lungs ached, throat burning. I raised the lantern high, flames sputtering, and screamed back, "I'm not you." The storm swallowed my defiance whole. The flame died. Darkness rushed in. For a moment I thought the world had ended. But then I saw them, not in shadow, not in outline. Faces. My face over and over, stretching into the blizzard. Their mouths moved in silence. Their eyes, my eyes, stared into me until I felt the marrow in my bones unspooling. I staggered to the edge of the ridge, snow collapsing underfoot. Black emptiness yawned below. My pick hovered in my fist. One thought pounded through the chaos. Jump and it ends. Jump and you're free. But then I heard it. Not my voice. Not the chorus. Something else. Elias. A woman's voice. Soft. Warm. My mother's. Long dead, gone since I was 12, but clear as the day she sang me to sleep through winter storms. My legs gave out. I dropped to my knees at the cliff's edge, sobbing into my scarf. The voices swelled around me, shifting from my echo to hers, then to others I had loved and lost. My father's rasp, my old mentor's laugh, a colleague's clipped accent, all woven together into one irresistible net. Home, they whispered. Come home. I closed my eyes. The snow pressed against me, soft and unrelenting. My arms slackened. The pick slipped from my grasp, vanishing into the void below. And in that instant, I knew. I would not leave this place, not truly. Whether I walked into the storm or stayed curled inside the outpost, the mountain had me. No helicopter would arrive, or if it did, it would find only prints in the snow circling an abandoned shack. Prints that led nowhere. When I opened my eyes, I was standing among them. My goggles reflected my own. My breath plumed in unison. My head tilted at the same angle, and I smiled. If anyone finds this journal, if it survives when I don't, know this. The Himalaya keeps what comes to it. Not just bodies, not just names carved on cairns. It keeps the living shape of you. It wears you. It whispers you. And once you hear your own voice in the storm, it is already too late. I am Dr. Elias Varga. I came here to study ice. I became ice. And when the next climber arrives, lost and weary, I'll be waiting in the wind to call his name. My name is Captain Elias Varga, former U.S. Army Special Forces. These days, I mostly take jobs that pay me to be cold, tired, and alone in places nobody else wants to go. The kind of work where men like me are still useful, guiding researchers into wilderness, keeping convoys alive in deserts, teaching corporate survival courses to executives who will never actually use the skills. It pays the bills, and it keeps my head quieter than sitting still ever could. This time, the contract brought me north. Too far north. The Yukon wilderness in January doesn't welcome men, not even men like me. The cold doesn't feel like air. It feels like weight, like pressure on your lungs, as if the atmosphere itself resents your presence. The survey team I was supposed to escort had set up camp near an old drilling site. 6 of them, all geologists and technicians, eager to punch holes in frozen ground and read what came up. I'd met them briefly in Whitehorse. Nervous laughter, thick glasses, hands that shook lighting cigarettes in the cold. I was supposed to join them a week later with resupplies. But 3 days before my scheduled arrival, their radio went dark. When the company couldn't raise them, they asked me to go in early, find out what happened. I didn't hesitate. Part of it was the paycheck. Part of it was habit. Soldiers don't ignore silence. Silence is its own kind of alarm. The snowmobile bucked beneath me as I followed the GPS toward their last known coordinates. The wind howled across the empty forest, rattling the trees until they creaked like old ships at sea. Every few minutes, I'd kill the engine just to listen. Out here, sound carries strange, the groan of ice shifting underground, the brittle snap of a branch, the sharp crack that might be frost splitting a boulder or something moving just out of sight. I don't scare easy. But by the second hour, I had the same itch in my stomach I used to feel before ambushes overseas. The air was too still between gusts, too empty. Like the wilderness itself was holding its breath. By late afternoon, the pale sun dipped low, casting the forest in bruised blue shadow. My goggles fogged with frost whenever I breathed. When I finally saw the first tent through the trees, I thought I'd feel relief. Instead, my pulse quickened. The camp was wrong. The snow around the tents was churned, as if people had been running, falling. A sled half buried in powder leaned on its side. The flap of the nearest tent banged softly against the frame in the wind, the zipper torn open. I cut the engine, and the silence afterward pressed against my ears. No voices, no generators, no smell of food or kerosene. I crouched low, scanning for tracks. Boot prints, yes, but overlapping and chaotic. Some went out into the tree line and didn't return. Others stopped suddenly, as if the person had been lifted straight into the air. I found no blood. No drag marks, just absence. The body knows before the mind accepts it. My skin prickled beneath 3 layers of clothing. My hand stayed on the grip of the pistol at my chest, without conscious thought. Something was off. Something was here. I called out anyway, because protocol demanded it. "This is Captain Elias Varga. Anyone in camp?" The wind answered. And then something else. A sound, faint, from deep in the trees, like a voice. High-pitched, distorted, as if someone far away was trying to yell through water. "Help!" It barely reached me, almost swallowed by the wind. But I knew what I'd heard. Every instinct screamed to get back on the snowmobile and report what I'd found. But I'd carried men out of worse than this. I couldn't ignore that voice. Not yet. I unhooked the rifle from the sled and slung it over my shoulder. My boots sank deep as I followed the direction of the sound. Each step crunched too loud in my ears. The trees pressed closer together, branches heavy with snow, shadows stretching long. Then I smelled it. Not smoke, not kerosene. Something else. Sharp, metallic like rust and wet stone. It cut through the cold air, and I knew it didn't belong here. The voice came again, closer this time. "Help!" I froze. It was the exact same tone as before, same pitch, same distance, like a recording played back through the trees. My training ran ahead of my fear. If it was a man, his voice wouldn't repeat like that. If it was an echo, it wouldn't carry against the wind. Whatever it wasn't natural. And still, a part of me wanted to believe. Wanted to find one of those scientists huddled beneath a tree, half frozen but alive. The snow crunched behind me. I spun, rifle raised, sight cutting through the dim blue light. Nothing. Just the empty camp 30 yards back, the wind stirring loose powder across the tents. But I knew, with the cold certainty of combat instinct, that I wasn't alone anymore. The stillness pressed on me harder than the cold. I've been in firefights where silence was a weapon, men waiting for you to move, to cough, to step on the wrong branch. This was different. It didn't feel like an enemy waiting. It felt like the forest itself watching. I swept my rifle barrel across the tree line, slow, steady, my breath plumed white through my balaclava. I listened the way we were trained to listen, filtering the wind, isolating faint breaks in rhythm. That's when I caught it. Not movement, not sound. Absence. No ravens cawing, no branches groaning. Even the wind seemed to die in chunks, like the world was holding its breath in time with mine. I backed toward the camp, careful, boots sliding in the powder. The prints I left looked too fragile, already filling with blowing snow. I wanted hard ground beneath me. I wanted cover, a wall, anything but this endless sprawl of trees. When I reached the edge of the camp, I crouched low by the torn tent. My gloved hand brushed canvas stiff with frost. The zipper teeth were bent, warped outward, as if something had forced its way in. I unhooked my flashlight, thumb hovering over the switch. Part of me didn't want to turn it on. Out here, light is a beacon. It tells anything watching exactly where you are. But darkness has its own teeth, and I couldn't afford to stumble blind. The beam cut through the dim blue twilight, revealing the inside of the tent. Gear was scattered, sleeping bags torn open, ration packs ripped apart. A laptop, screen shattered, half buried in snow blown through the flap. The scientists had left in a hurry, or been taken. I found a glove in the corner. Inside it, a handprint of dried frost, like someone had worn it, then pulled their hand out fast, leaving the sweat to freeze against the lining. That metallic smell was stronger here, clawing the back of my throat. I scanned the tent walls and found streaks on the nylon. Not blood. Too dark, too brittle. It looked like frozen tar, smeared by frantic hands. I backed out, heart thumping, forcing slow breaths. Fear is manageable if you recognize it. Name it. Break it down. That's what the army taught me, but as I knelt there, the voice came again. Help. Closer. I swung the flashlight toward the trees. For half a second, I thought I saw a figure standing just beyond the reach of the beam. Pale. Thin. Then the snow gusted and it was gone. I wanted to chase. My body almost moved, but something deeper, older, held me back. An instinct that didn't come from training, but from being a man alone in wilderness too long. That wasn't a person. That was bait. I tightened my grip on the rifle and muttered through clenched teeth, "Not tonight." Instead, I moved through the other tents, quick and quiet, flashlight low. More chaos, more of that strange black residue. In one tent, the support pole was bent inward, like something heavy had pressed from the outside until it snapped. In another, I found a boot with the laces torn apart, not cut, not untied, but shredded. No bodies, not even bones, just absence. The snow crunched again behind me. I spun, faster this time. My light sliced across the camp, landing on the sled I'd seen earlier. And that's when I saw it. Just for an instant. A hand. Not gloved, bare skin, gray-white, gripping the edge of the sled. Too long, fingers crooked at impossible angles. Then it slid back into shadow, smooth as water. I raised the rifle, safety already off. My breath roared inside the mask. My heart pounded against the stock. "Show yourself," I hissed. The forest gave me silence. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Circling the edge of the camp just far enough that my light couldn't catch them. Each step exaggerated, crunching snow the way a predator might drag its paw to remind prey it was close. I pivoted, tracking sound, but it moved with unnatural grace. One moment to my left, the next to my right. Then behind me. Then gone. The voice came again, almost a whisper now. "Help." But this time I heard something layered beneath it, a rasp, guttural like stone dragged against stone. The word wasn't spoken. It was shaped, mimicked. I lowered the beam, forced myself to breathe, slow, steady. If I fired blind, I'd waste ammo, and panic was worse than any enemy. The footsteps stopped. The trees groaned with wind, and then, in the silence that followed, I understood something I hadn't let myself believe until now. Whatever had taken those scientists, it wasn't gone. It was here, watching me, waiting. I stayed crouched by the tent for what felt like minutes, rifle trained on the tree line, every nerve alive. When you've spent years in combat, you learn the value of stillness. Sometimes movement draws fire. Sometimes the smartest play is to wait and let the enemy make the mistake. But the Yukon doesn't play by rules. Neither did whatever was out there. The metallic stench thickened, rolling in on the wind. My tongue tasted it. Iron, wet stone, rot. My stomach turned. I'd smelled death before, and this wasn't it. Death goes stale. This was alive. I pulled back to the sled where my supplies were strapped. If I was going to survive this, I needed fire, light, something that gave me control over the dark. My hands worked fast, unscrewed the cap on a small canister of stove fuel, splashed it into a dented pot, struck the lighter. The flame hissed up bright, wavering in the cold air. The shadows recoiled. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt like I'd stolen a breath back from the thing out there. Then I heard it again. Not the voice this time. Something else, a scrape, long, like nails dragged against bark. I swung the beam of my flashlight. A spruce tree 10 yards away bore 4 fresh gouges in its trunk, long and deep, cutting through frozen bark into raw wood. I hadn't heard it approach. I hadn't seen it do it. But the mark was there. New. A warning. I whispered, low and bitter, "You want me rattled? Not tonight." I forced myself into the tents again, searching faster now. Anything that explained what they'd found. Anything I could use. At the back of one, under a collapsed cot, I found a notebook frozen stiff. The pages were curled with moisture, but a few words stood out in jagged pen strokes. We drilled deeper. Not ice, not stone, hollow. Moved when we hit it. Don't listen to the rest of the line was torn through, ripped by something sharp. I stuffed the notebook in my pack and moved back into the open. The fire hissed, weak against the wind. My eyes scanned the tree line. Every shadow looked alive. And then it stepped closer. Not all the way out, not into the light, just enough. The shape was wrong. Too tall, too thin. Limbs bending at odd angles like they'd been broken and never set right. Skin pale against the dark, stretched tight over joints that jutted like knives. No face, at least not one I could see. just a smooth, pale oval where a face should be. I raised the rifle. My breath fogged my goggles. I sighted center mass, finger tightening. The thing tilted its head, a sharp, jerking tilt, and from that blank face came the sound again. Help! The exact pitch, the exact crack and tone of the first call I'd heard. I fired. The muzzle flash lit the camp. The crack split the night wide. The figure jerked back into the trees with inhuman speed, vanishing into black. Snow puffed from the ground where my round struck, splintering bark. The forest roared back to silence. I moved fast, racking another round, scanning every shadow. Nothing. Only the sound of my pulse. Then footsteps, sprinting, circling, faster than before. The ground trembled faintly with its weight. My training screamed to move, to get hard cover, but there was none. Just canvas and snow. The thing's voice came again, overlapping now, not one help, but many. The same word, the same voice echoing from every side of the camp, like a chorus of the lost. Help, 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 help. My gut clenched. My brain knew the truth. It wasn't calling to me. It was telling me what it had already consumed. I yanked a flare from my pack, cracked it open. Red light blazed against the snow, casting everything in bloody shadow. I hurled it into the trees. For a fraction of a second, I saw it again, skittering between trunks, too fast, too low, like a spider with limbs too long. The flare's light painted its skin raw, revealed claws dragging grooves in the snow. Then it vanished behind the trees. I fired again, a wild shot into the dark. The echo bounced back empty. The voices stopped. The forest settled. My knees shook, but I forced myself steady. A soldier doesn't break because the enemy wants him to. A soldier adapts. I dragged the sled closer to the fire, checked my ammo, 3 magazines left. Enough to fight, not enough to waste. For a long moment, nothing moved. The night stretched. The fire hissed lower. My lungs burned with cold. I began to wonder if it had gone, if maybe the gunfire had driven it back. Then I noticed the snow. At the edge of the camp, half-covered tracks appeared where none had been before. Long, wide, spaced, too far apart for a man. They hadn't been there a minute ago. They weren't leading away, they were leading in, and they stopped 10 feet from where I stood. The tracks stopped 10 feet from me, pressed deep into the snow, each one larger than my open hand. My beam traced the line of prints, but there was nothing standing there. Nothing I could see. My finger tightened on the trigger. Every nerve screamed at me to fire, to tear holes through the empty air in front of me. But I held. Soldiers don't shoot at ghosts. Ammunition is life, and panic wastes it. The silence pressed harder, like the forest itself leaned in to watch. Then the fire guttered. The flame shrank to a sputtering glow, choking on its own smoke. My heart slammed. That wasn't wind. That wasn't natural. I dropped to one knee, sweeping the rifle in slow arcs. My flashlight beam stuttered across the trees, branches heavy with snow, shadows twisting, and then it hit me. Not a sound. Not a sight. A weight. The air itself seemed to press down on me, heavy, like I'd stepped into deep water. My ears popped. My chest tightened. Something massive stood just beyond the reach of my light, invisible, but there. I raised the rifle, breath ragged. My beam flicked across white trunks, then movement. It erupted out of the dark. A blur of pale limbs, low and fast, the snow exploding beneath it. My body reacted before thought. I squeezed the trigger, rounds cracking in rapid bursts. The muzzle flash lit the thing mid-leap, a nightmare shape. Joints bent backward, claws stretched wide, face smooth and eyeless. Bullets tore into it, dark spray hitting snow. The impact knocked it sideways. It crashed through a tent, canvas ripping like paper. I spun, firing another burst through the collapsing fabric, chasing the sound. The screams of torn nylon drowned the forest. Then silence. My breath roared in my ears, my shoulder ached from recoil. The tent lay shredded, pieces flapping in the wind, snow drifted across dark stains. I held aim on the ruin, finger tight on the trigger. Nothing moved. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. A minute. My heart refused to slow. Then slowly, the shredded fabric lifted. Not by wind, by something pushing from beneath. A hand, long and skeletal, clawed out from the wreckage. Fingers spread, scraping across snow. Another hand followed, digging grooves as it pulled itself free. It rose. Even hunched, it towered over me, limbs too long, too thin. Where I'd hit it, holes gaped in its flesh, leaking a dark fluid that steamed in the cold, but it didn't bleed like anything human. The wounds pulsed, knitting, closing before my eyes. "Help!" The voice came again, but closer now, rawer. Not imitation, not a trick from the trees. It came from its mouthless face, from somewhere deep inside it. I fired again. The recoil slammed my shoulder, brass flying. The rounds hit, tearing through chest, shoulder, limb. The thing staggered, then dropped low, scuttling sideways with impossible speed. I swung, tracking, firing until the bolt locked back. Empty. The monster vanished into the tree line. Branches cracked, snow cascaded, then swallowed the sound. My chest heaved, my hands shook, slick with sweat inside my gloves. I dropped the mag, slammed in another, racked the bolt. My ears rang. My body wanted to collapse, but instinct kept me upright, eyes scanning. Snow fell gently, as if the world wanted to pretend nothing had happened. But I'd hit it. I'd seen the wounds, and it hadn't died. I moved fast, dragging the sled closer to the fire, feeding more fuel into the pot until the flames roared higher. Light spilled across the camp, painting shadows long and red. Fire was my only ally now. I crouched, pulled the frozen notebook from my pack, turned to another page. The handwriting grew frantic, slanted, but one line stabbed through. It mimics. Not just voices. Us. It learns. My stomach dropped. Behind me, snow crunched. I spun, rifle raised, finger poised, and froze. A figure stood at the edge of the firelight. Human this time. A man in a heavy parka, hood pulled low, goggles frosted. One of the survey team, his gloved hands shook as he raised them. His voice cracked with relief. "Captain Varga? Oh, thank God!" He staggered forward into the glow. His goggles reflected the firelight, hiding his eyes. His parka hung loose, torn at the seams. His voice broke again, desperate. "Please, help me." The words struck me like ice water. Same pitch, same tone, the exact same cadence as the thing had used before. I aimed center mass. My breath clouded the air between us. My finger trembled against the trigger. The man, or the thing wearing him, froze. Its head tilted, sharp, unnatural, and then it smiled. The hood fell back. The goggles slipped, revealing a face that wasn't a face at all. Skin stretched smooth, features swallowed as if it had worn a mask too long and forgotten the shape beneath. It lunged. I fired point blank. The impact knocked it off balance, body jerking, collapsing into the snow with a strangled rasp. It writhed, clawing at the ground, body tearing, reforming, refusing to die. I backed toward the fire, rifle steady, every muscle locked. My lungs burned, my mind screamed. This wasn't a predator. Predators kill to feed. This thing played. It mimicked, it learned, and it wanted me alive. The body writhed in the snow, spasms jerking its limbs like a marionette cut from its strings. My shots had torn it open, dark ichor steaming in the cold, soaking the powder beneath. It twitched once more, then lay still. I kept my rifle leveled. I'd seen men fake death before. Sometimes the smartest move is to let the enemy think you've won. But this wasn't a man. "Stay down," I muttered, though I knew it couldn't understand. Or maybe it could. I circled wide, boots crunching, never lowering the barrel. The firelight flickered across its pale body, revealing wounds that should have ended anything living. Yet already the edges of the holes shivered, knitting. Not fast, not whole, but closing. I fired a final round into its chest. The crack split the night. The body jerked, then sagged. And then it laughed. Not loud, not human. A sound like branches grinding together in the wind. It shuddered from its chest, hollow, mocking. I stepped back, bile in my throat. My rifle felt too light, too useless. The thing went still again, but I didn't trust it. I retreated to the sled, yanked free the small hatchet strapped there. Metal in hand gave me focus. Guns kill at distance. Blades remind you you're still alive. The fire spat sparks into the dark. The forest loomed just beyond. Endless trunks fading into shadow. And that's when I understood something deeper, something worse. If it could mimic voices, if it could wear a man's shape, then what I just killed wasn't the only one. Maybe it wasn't even the real one. The thought dug into my spine like frost. I forced myself into motion. Fear freezes. Movement keeps you alive. I dragged broken gear into a rough barricade around the fire, metal frames and torn cots forming a circle. Every soldier knows when the perimeter fails, you make a new one. By the time I was done, my breath came ragged, sweat soaking under my parka despite the cold, my goggles fogged. I pulled them off, blinked into the sting of icy air. That's when I heard it again. Captain Varga. My name. Spoken clear. My blood ran cold. It came from the trees, low and steady, the way a man calls to another in the dark. Not panicked. Calm. Too calm. Captain Varga. Over here. It was the voice of Sergeant Rowe, a man I'd served with years ago in Afghanistan. Rowe had been dead for almost a decade. My knees weakened. My chest tightened. Come on, sir. This way. The exact cadence. The same rasp. The ghost of a man I'd buried with my own hands. No, I growled, forcing steel into my voice. You don't get that from me. The wind hissed. Snow whispered off branches. The voice faded. I checked my ammo again. 2 magazines and loose rounds in my pocket. Enough for one night if I didn't waste them. Maybe. I stoked the fire higher, feeding it everything I could burn, broken tent poles, nylon ration boxes. The flames climbed, shadows dancing tall. For a moment, the heat cut the edge of the cold, seared my skin through layers. For a moment, I felt almost safe, until I realized the forest was no longer silent. A new sound rose, low at first, then growing. Not footsteps, not a voice. Breathing, surrounding me, slow, synchronized inhalations, dozens of them, in and out as if the trees themselves had lungs. I gritted my teeth, lifted the rifle, turned slow circles, the fire hissed, the barricade rattled, my pulse thundered. Then at the edge of the light, eyes. Not glowing. Reflecting. Dozens of them, flickering red with the firelight, all fixed on me. I raised the rifle, ready to fire, when they blinked out all at once. Gone. The breathing stopped, and the silence that followed was worse than the sound. I backed to the fire, every sense screaming. The notebook burned in my memory. It mimics, it learns, which meant every second I survived, it was adapting, watching, becoming smarter. The fire crackled high, my barricade held, for now. My body ached, mind fraying at the edges. I'd been in night-long battles before, but those had rules, ammo counts, men beside you, a sun you could count on to rise. Out here, in this endless winter, there were no rules, no guarantee of dawn. I sat with my back to the sled, rifle across my knees, hatchet in hand. My breath came steady, measured. If it wanted me, it would have to come through the fire. Somewhere in the trees, something laughed again, and then, softly, sweetly, like a child learning its first word, it whispered, Elias. The way it spoke my name, it wasn't random. It wasn't just sound bouncing from a hollow chest. It carried weight, a terrible recognition, like it knew me. I gripped the rifle tighter, knuckles white under the gloves. Training kept me breathing steady, but my body shook anyway. Not from cold, from something deeper. The forest stayed quiet, too quiet. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. The fire crackled, throwing shadows that twisted like figures. Then came the sound I'd been dreading, snow shifting, not distant this time. Close, just beyond the barricade. I swung the rifle toward the noise, heart pounding. My flashlight beam swept across jagged metal and torn canvas, then froze. A hand, thin, pale, fingers too long, hooked over the top of the barricade. Another hand joined it, and then it began to climb. I fired. The round hit with a wet crack, spraying dark fluid across the snow. The hands disappeared. The fire hissed, sparks flying. My ears rang, then a thud shook the sled at my back. I spun, just in time to see the barricade shudder as something slammed into it from the other side. Metal frames groaned, wood splintered. Another impact, harder this time. A cot leg snapped, flying into the fire. The thing wasn't testing me anymore. It was coming in. I emptied 3 rounds into the point of impact. The barricade collapsed inward, snow spraying, shards of metal clattering across ice. And then it burst through, pale and twisted, its limbs bent like broken scaffolding, claws carving grooves in the snow. Holes still gaped in its flesh from earlier shots, steaming, but it moved as if unharmed, its faceless head tilted toward me, skin rippling as if something inside was trying to push through. I dropped the rifle to full auto and let loose. The camp filled with thunder. The recoil battered my shoulder, brass flying. Bullets tore chunks from its chest, limbs, abdomen. It staggered, lurched, then leapt. We collided. The rifle was ripped from my hands. Its claws shredded the sled frame inches from my head. I rolled, grabbing the hatchet, swinging hard. Metal bit into flesh. A shriek tore the night, high-pitched, bone-splitting. Dark fluid sprayed across my parka, hot against the cold. It swung back. Claws caught my side, tearing fabric, burning through to skin. Pain seared. I staggered, swung again, burying the hatchet deep in its shoulder. The impact rattled my arm. The thing lurched backward, ripping the blade free, black ichor pouring down its chest. It twitched, spasmed, then skittered sideways, circling me on all fours like some grotesque animal. I grabbed the fallen rifle, slammed a fresh mag home, turned to track it. My lungs heaved, vision tunneling. It stopped at the far edge of the firelight. For a second, I thought maybe I'd heard it enough to slow it down. Then it stood upright. Its form shifted, flesh rippled, bones cracked, and in the glow of the fire it began to change. I watched, horror-struck, as its limbs shortened, its torso straightened, skin pulled taut, then reshaped. Clothing bubbled out of nowhere, threads weaving from its own flesh. A parka, goggles, frosted breath, and then me. It stood there in the firelight, a mirror image. Same gear, same rifle, same stance. Only the face was wrong, just smooth, pale skin stretched tight where mine should be. It lifted its rifle. I dove sideways as the crack split the night. Snow exploded where I'd been standing. It had copied the motion, the weapon, the sound. Another shot roared. The round whizzed past my head, splintering a tent pole. I crawled behind the sled wreckage as breath ragged, side burning from the wound. My mind screamed against what I'd just seen. It didn't just mimic voices. It didn't just wear faces. It could learn to be me. I reloaded with shaking hands, mag clicking home. "You want to play soldier?" I hissed. "Fine. Let's see how good you are." I popped from cover, fired 2 bursts. The thing fired back. Shots cracking, close, precise. It ducked, moved, advanced like it had drilled for years. Like it had stolen every ounce of muscle memory from watching me. But it wasn't perfect. Its recoil was sloppy, its bursts too long. It was strong, fast, relentless. But it hadn't learned discipline. Not yet. I angled fire low, chewing snow into a storm, masking my movement. Then I flanked hard, sprinting wide through the dark, pain stabbing my side. I swung left, came up behind it as it adjusted fire. I fired point blank into its back. Rounds tore through flesh. It shrieked, stumbled forward, then spun, clawed hand swiping wide. I ducked, drove the hatchet into its leg. Bone cracked, it dropped, twisting, still firing. The muzzle flash blinded. Heat seared past my cheek. I wrestled the rifle, yanked the barrel aside, smashed the buttstock across its faceless head. It collapsed into the snow, writhing. Dark ichor bubbled from its wounds, steaming into the night. I staggered back, chest heaving, side bleeding. My rifle hung heavy, hands slick. It lay there twitching, then went still. But I didn't believe it. Not for a second. I aimed down at it, finger trembling on the trigger, knowing if I fired again, I might just waste the last of my ammo. The notebook's words echoed in my skull. It learns. If I could hurt it this badly, then it could hurt me worse. If I could fight, it could fight better next time. The fire roared high, shadows writhing, and in the silence that followed, it whispered again, my voice this time. Perfect. Calm. Cold. You can't kill yourself, Elias. Its words cut deeper than the claws ever had. I'd been shot at, clawed, nearly torn apart, but hearing my own voice, my exact tone, cadence, even the way I grit my teeth in stress, broke something inside me. It wasn't mocking anymore. It was rehearsing, refining, perfecting. The creature wasn't trying to kill me outright. It was learning how to replace me. The thought coiled in my chest like barbed wire. My breath fogged heavy in the freezing air, each inhale ragged, each exhale a visible tremor of fear. My side burned from the gash. My ammo was low. And across the snow, the thing lay half-sprawled, steaming fluid leaking into the frost, but its head tilted toward me with unsettling calm, like it had already won. I couldn't let it get up, couldn't let it finish whatever process it had started. I steadied my rifle on its chest, finger tightening. "Do it," it said, my voice firm, commanding like a drill sergeant. "You know you won't pull the trigger, because if you kill me, you kill yourself." The barrel quivered. Rage fought with logic. It wasn't me. It couldn't be. But my gut twisted, brain sparking with doubt, because hearing my own voice echo from that faceless mask made instinct stumble. It used that hesitation. In one twitch, it rolled sideways. My shot cracked through empty snow. By the time I corrected, it was moving low and fast, body contorting unnaturally like joints bending the wrong way. I fired again, missed. Again, hit but not enough to stop it. Then it was gone into the tree line. The silence that followed was worse than the fight itself. No snow crunch, no breath, just gone. I backed toward the fire, rifle sweeping arcs. Shadows clawed up the tents, the sled wreckage, the smoke curling into the dark. My training whispered, "Control your panic," but it was too late for control. Panic had already dug in. I muttered under my breath, not even words, just noise, anything to drown out the ringing silence. My boots sank into slush as I circled the fire, every muscle screaming at me to run, though there was nowhere to go. Then, snap, behind me. I spun, weapon raised, finger already pulling, then froze. A figure stood in the glow, me. Standing tall, rifle leveled, steady as stone. No wounds, no torn parka, no bloodied face. The better version. It didn't charge, didn't growl, it just mirrored me. Every shift of my feet, every tilt of my rifle, even the twitch of my injured side, a sick reflection. I realized too late, the firelight wasn't protecting me anymore. It was spotlighting me, making me visible while the creature copied, studied, improved. It lowered its weapons slowly, deliberately, mimicking the way I used to when calming civilians. Then it spoke, my voice, but clearer, stronger. Elias Sorensen, Special Forces, survivalist, disciplined, resilient, I know you now. Hearing my name spoken like a mission debrief made my stomach hollow out. I backed a step. It followed, perfect timing, like we were tethered by some invisible line. If I stayed, it would outlast me, outthink me, outfight me. My only chance was unpredictability, chaos, something it couldn't copy. So I did the one thing it wouldn't expect from me. I screamed, a raw animal roar. I charged, swinging the hatchet in wild arcs, slamming into it with reckless force. No strategy, no precision, just brutality. It faltered. My hatchet connected with its shoulder, biting deep. It staggered, caught off guard. For once, I had broken its rhythm. I pressed the attack, slashing, shoving, bashing with the rifle stock. Black ichor sprayed, sizzling against snow. It shrieked, a distorted version of my scream, delayed like it hadn't rehearsed it yet. We went down together, rolling in the snow, firelight spinning overhead. Claws ripped at my gear, tearing straps, scraping ribs. I jammed the hatchet up under its jaw, forcing it back, black fluid gushing hot over my gloves. It writhed, strength monstrous, nearly buckling me, but desperation lent me fury. I pushed harder, screaming again, until the blade sank deeper, splitting something vital. The creature convulsed. Its body twitched, limbs bending wrong, skin splitting. It let out a sound that was almost a laugh, then collapsed into the snow, still and broken. Steam poured from its wounds, rising like smoke from a dying fire. The faceless mask sagged, melting, folding back into the pale, featureless surface it had worn before. I staggered away, hatchet dripping, lungs burning, my knees hit the snow. I forced breath in and out, each inhale sharp with blood and cold. It was over, had to be over. The fire popped, crackled, wind stirred the tents. My own heartbeat thudded like a drum in my ears, then a whisper from the tree line. Faint, familiar. Sorensen. Not one voice, many. Dozens, hundreds, all mine. The sound rippled through the forest like the trees themselves were repeating me, copying me, spreading me. I clamped a hand over my mouth, shaking. The one I'd killed wasn't the only one. Maybe not even the first. And out there in the dark, the echoes were practicing. The forest wouldn't shut up. Everywhere I turned, my voice called out from the darkness. Higher, lower, urgent, calm. Sometimes it whispered like a lover. Sometimes it barked orders like I was back on the line in Afghanistan. Other times it sounded broken, panicked, exactly like me in this moment. But always, it was me. The trees stood like black spires, each one echoing, bouncing the sound deeper into the night until the whole wilderness felt alive with my voice. I stumbled back toward the fire, hatchet dangling from my grip, rifle nearly empty. My side burned with every step, warm blood soaking cold fabric. The flames seemed pitifully small now, like a candle in a cathedral of shadows. I should have been dead already. Maybe I was. Maybe this was some drawn-out punishment. "Stop it," I roared at the forest, my throat ripped raw, steam pouring from my mouth. "You're not me." The echoes faltered. For a moment, silence. My own voice finally swallowed. Then, from the tree line, one stepped forward. Me again. Standing tall, parka neat, unbloodied. The perfect soldier. Behind it, another figure peeled out of the dark. Then another. And another. A line of silhouettes stretching between the pines, each one molded into me. Different stances, different movements, but all carrying my build, my gear, my walk. Dozens. Maybe more. I gripped the rifle, lifted it, sight swaying over their faceless masks. My ammo wouldn't last 2 seconds. The front copy tilted its head, a motion I knew by heart. I did that whenever I was calculating an angle, sizing up terrain. Seeing it reflected back at me broke something loose inside. I couldn't win this fight, not against all of them. The only option was to run. I spun from the fire, bolted into the opposite woods. My boots hammered snow, lungs tearing, pain screaming in my side. Branches whipped my face, frost clawed my eyes. The echoes followed, not yelling now, but laughing, an endless chorus of my laugh filling the black between the trees. I crashed downhill, slipping, catching myself, nearly dropping the rifle. Somewhere behind, dozens of footfalls moved in rhythm, chasing, stalking, not frantic, patient, like hunters driving their prey. The ground leveled into a frozen riverbed. Moonlight shimmered across cracked ice, a faint glow against the void of forest. I sprinted across, each step echoing. My reflection flashed below, my real face, gaunt, bloodied, terrified. For once, unmistakably mine. Then another reflection appeared beside it, and another, and another. The ice groaned, cracks spiderwebbed under my boots. I barely made the bank before a section caved in behind me, freezing water surging up. The forest roared with laughter. My laughter doubled, tripled, multiplied into something monstrous. I collapsed against a fallen log, chest heaving. My vision blurred. My legs trembled. I couldn't outrun them. But maybe I could bury them. The notebook's last entry clawed back into my mind. Fire slows it. Fire keeps it from spreading. If the cold was their breeding ground, then fire was the only weapon I had left. I ripped open my pack, hands fumbling with the last of the flares, the emergency fuel canister. My side screamed with every movement, blood soaking through. I jammed the flare cap open, struck it against the igniter. A blinding red flame burst to life, painting the trees in hell light. The shadows stopped laughing. They watched. Dozens of me, silent now, faceless heads tilting in unison. I staggered upright, holding the flare high. My own voice boomed back from the dark. "You won't burn yourself, Elias. You don't have it in you." "Watch me," I spat. I hurled the flare into the tree line, fuel canister after it. The explosion lit the night, fire leaping into the branches. Dry pine caught fast, roaring to life. The wall of flame surged outward, devouring snow, smoke curling into the frozen air. The copies shrieked as one. Some stumbled back, some burst into flames outright, their bodies writhing, twisting, collapsing. The air filled with the stench of burning meat and chemical smoke. I fell to my knees, coughing, eyes streaming. Heat blasted against my face. The fire spread, unstoppable now, racing across the forest floor, climbing trunks. And in the chaos, I realized the mistake. Fire didn't just consume them, it consumed everything. The tree line in every direction was burning. I'd turned the frozen wilderness into a furnace, and there was no way out. I stumbled backward as a burning tree split and collapsed across the riverbed, sparks shooting skyward. My lungs clawed for air, smoke choking every breath. Behind the roar of flames, I heard it again. One last voice. Not an echo this time. Not a copy. It was my voice, whispered directly into my ear, though no one stood there. "Now you've taught us fear." The fire roared higher, blotting out the stars. The shadows vanished into flame and smoke. My vision tunneled, head spinning, knees buckling. The last thing I saw before collapsing was a figure, me again, walking calmly through the fire, untouched, face still blank, carrying my rifle across its shoulder as if it belonged to it all along. Then the dark took me. Whether I woke again, I can't tell you. All I know is that somewhere out there, in those endless black pines, my voice is still calling. And if you hear it, don't answer, because it's not me. It never was. My name is Eric Halverson, 41 years old, former Norwegian Special Forces, now working as a private security consultant. People say I'm calm, maybe too calm, the kind of man who calculates every angle before pulling a trigger. Discipline has always been my strength, but it has also made me stubborn. When I say I'm going to do something, I finish it, even if it kills me. That stubbornness is what brought me here, into the endless white expanse of the Himalayan snow mountains. I had taken a contract to escort a group of researchers surveying glacial shifts. They were bright minds, but fragile bodies. One slip of a crampon, and they'd be gone. My job was to make sure that didn't happen. When the storm rolled in faster than any forecast had predicted, we were forced to dig in and wait it out. Hours turned into days. Supplies ran thin. And then one morning, when the wind finally eased, the scientists were gone. I don't mean they wandered off. Their tents were still here, ripped open from the outside, equipment scattered, no footprints leading away. Just emptiness, as though the mountain itself had swallowed them whole. At first I thought avalanche, but the snow was undisturbed. Then I thought madness, altitude sickness making them abandon camp. But their journals, half buried under ice, spoke of something else, of voices outside their tents at night, of scratching along the snow as if claws were dragging themselves in circles around us. Now it was just me, alone, and I knew I had to descend before the storm returned. The air here feels alive, pressing on my chest with every breath. The cold isn't just cold. It burns, it whispers, it feels intentional. My nostrils sting with the metallic scent of frozen blood, though none is visible. The sky is a bruised shade of gray, and every gust of wind howls not like weather, but like something in pain. That morning, as I strapped on my pack and prepared to move, I noticed something unusual. The snow near the ridge bore indentations, not human, not animal, too large, too irregular, like something dragging itself upright with both hands and feet. The prints sank deep into the ice, as if whatever made them carried enormous weight. I wanted to believe they were distortions, the product of wind. But I've tracked men in forests, insurgents in deserts, smugglers across tundra. I know a trail when I see one. And this one was circling my camp. I swallowed down instinct and forced myself to think like a soldier. First, evaluate the threat. Second, conserve resources. Third, move. I tightened the straps on my rifle, adjusted my goggles, and began following the ridge down toward the valley. But the deeper I went, the quieter the world became. The usual crackle of snow beneath boots was muted, no distant avalanche rumbles, no cry of birds. Even the wind seemed to pause, leaving me in a silence so complete it pressed on my eardrums. And then I heard it. A low, guttural breathing. Not my own, not human. It rose from below the ice, vibrating through the soles of my boots like a buried engine trying to start. I froze, scanning the ridge with the patience drilled into me from years of recon. My finger brushed the trigger guard of my rifle. My heart hammered, but my mind worked like a machine. Options, angles, exits. The sound pulsed again, closer, like something beneath me was moving upward through layers of snow. For a moment, I thought of the stories whispered by Sherpas, the Yeti, the abominable snowman. I had dismissed them as folklore. But standing there, hearing that impossible breath, I wasn't so sure anymore. The snow ahead shifted. A crack, sharp and sudden, split the ice like bone breaking. I raised my rifle, steady despite the tremor in my gut. A black void yawned open 10 meters ahead, steam curling from it as though the mountain exhaled. I approached each step deliberate, controlled. At the edge, I peered down. The fissure disappeared into darkness, far deeper than any storm crevasse. And in that darkness, something shifted. Pale, massive, a glint of reflection like eyes catching light. I stepped back immediately, breath frosting the air. Training screamed at me. Never let the enemy control the ground. But this enemy wasn't insurgents with AKs. This was something the textbooks never prepared me for. The snow groaned again, and a shape began pulling itself upward. Long arms matted with ice. Fingers too wide, tipped with claws that dug into the ice like steel hooks. The head rose last, covered in white fur, face half concealed, but eyes too intelligent. Eyes that locked onto mine with the focus of a predator deciding if prey was worth the effort. I don't remember pulling the trigger, but the rifle cracked, muzzle flash searing the gray air. The creature recoiled, not from pain, but as if testing my response. No blood stained the snow. It bared teeth the size of blades, then sank back into the fissure, vanishing as quickly as it came. Silence returned, heavier than before. I should have felt relief. Instead, dread settled deeper into my bones, because I knew it wasn't gone. It was watching, waiting, and I was still trapped on its mountain. I forced myself to move. Staring into that fissure any longer would have been suicide. My training drilled one thing into me. Hesitation gets you killed. So I set my jaw, tightened the straps on my pack, and descended the ridge as quickly and quietly as my boots would allow. But each step carried the weight of eyes still watching me, eyes buried beneath layers of ice and darkness. The mountain was silent, but it was no longer empty. That silence was alive now, carrying intent. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the way the creature had looked at me, not like an animal, not like a beast. It had studied me, tested me, as though it wanted to know if I was worth the chase. I didn't want to be worth the chase. The air thinned as I pushed lower, but that didn't matter. I'd been trained to breathe through exhaustion, to regulate each inhale and exhale. What shook me wasn't my lungs, but the smell that clung to the wind, a rank odor like rotting meat frozen for months and then thawed in seconds. It made the back of my throat tighten, forced me to swallow against bile. Snow shifted behind me. Not an avalanche, not wind. A single step. Deliberate. I spun, rifle raised, sight lines sweeping the ridge above. Nothing. Just snow, rock, shadow. My heart pounded so hard it blurred the edges of my vision. I scanned again, slower, steadying myself, the way I had done in ambush training 100 times before. Still nothing. And then, low on the horizon, at the edge of the ridge, a shape moved. Not fast, not lunging, just standing. A tall, pale outline that blended almost perfectly with the snow, watching me with the patience of a hunter who had no need to rush. I tightened my grip, sighted in. The scope caught a flicker of reflection where its eyes should have been. And then, in the time it took me to blink, the figure was gone. Not retreated. Not fled. Gone, as if it had never been there at all. I kept moving, every nerve on fire. I didn't run. Running meant burning energy, making noise, surrendering control. I advanced by training, step by step, eyes scanning, ears straining for any break in the stillness. My boots crunched faintly in the snow. That was the only sound. Hours passed, or maybe it was less. In this emptiness, time folded on itself. Shadows stretched long across the white expanse as the sun dipped toward the jagged horizon. I needed shelter before night. The thought of being exposed when darkness fell tightened my chest like a vice. Finally, I spotted it, a small overhang of rock jutting out from the slope, enough to shield me from the wind. I cleared the snow, checked the interior for cracks or hidden dangers, and set my pack down. The sun was nearly gone, bleeding red across the peaks. I built no fire. Fire meant light, and light meant visibility. I wanted concealment more than comfort. I huddled against the stone, rifle across my knees, eyes on the white silence stretching below. That's when the sound returned. Not the breathing this time. Not the single, deliberate step. This was worse. A series of knocks, soft at first, like someone tapping their knuckles against hollow wood. But there was no wood here, only rock and ice. The knocking echoed from somewhere beneath me, as though the mountain itself was being rapped upon from the inside. Tap, tap, tap. I gritted my teeth. My mind, disciplined as it was, began to slip toward memories I hated. Ambushes gone wrong, teammates bleeding out while I was forced to listen helplessly, the sound of boots pacing outside a safe house where I was trapped, that same rhythm, that same patient, taunting rhythm. I pressed my back to the stone and shut my eyes, breathing slow, forcing the fear down. Fear is a weapon. You let it in, it controls you. I repeated the mantra until my jaw unclenched, but the knocking didn't stop. Tap, tap, tap. And then a whisper. It was faint, almost carried on the wind, but I knew it wasn't wind. Wind doesn't form words. My name. Spoken once, low and guttural, dragging each syllable like claws across ice. Eric. My skin went cold beneath layers of insulated gear. I gripped my rifle, but firing into shadows would be suicide. It wanted me to waste ammunition. It wanted me to break discipline. I sat there through the night, knuckles white on the stock, while the mountain whispered my name through stone. When dawn finally came, gray and pale, the knocking stopped. The silence returned, heavier than ever. My body ached from stillness, but I forced myself upright, checked my gear, and moved on. The descent grew steeper, the ice slicker. Twice I nearly slipped into hidden crevasses. Once, as I steadied myself on a ledge, I glanced down and saw it again. The creature. Far below this time, moving across the snow with a speed that belied its size. It didn't stumble, didn't falter. It glided across the drifts as though the mountain itself bent beneath its will. And though it was distant, I knew it was following me. I kept moving, but no matter how careful, how silent, I could feel it closing the distance. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself into a calculated retreat. Retreat with control. Retreat with discipline. By midday, exhaustion burned through me. I found another shelter, a shallow cave carved into the ice. The inside reeked of that same rotting stench, as though something had been here before me. My rational mind said this was a bad idea, but the soldier in me knew exposure would kill faster than fear. I crawled inside. The air was damp, heavy, suffocating. The walls glistened with frozen moisture, reflecting dim light in fractured patterns that looked like eyes staring from every angle. I forced myself deeper until I found a space wide enough to sit with my rifle ready. That's when I saw it. Etched into the ice, faint but deliberate, were marks, not scratches from claws, not random fractures. Symbols, carved with precision, circles intersecting lines, spirals that seemed to twist into the ice itself. I reached out with gloved fingers, tracing one. It was deep, deeper than any blade could carve without time and patience. And the moment my glove touched it, the cave exhaled. A gust of air, warm, fetid, rising from the depths behind me. And in that gust, again, the whisper. Closer this time. Eric. The whisper clung to me like frostbite. I twisted around, rifle raised, scope tracking the dark rear of the cave. My breath fogged the glass, and I had to wipe it clear with my glove. Nothing moved in the shadows, but the warmth of that exhalation still pressed against my skin, damp and foul, like air expelled from lungs buried deep beneath ice. I fought the urge to retreat. Retreat meant exposure, but staying meant entrapment. A soldier calculates risk, and right now every calculation ended with me dead if I stayed too long. My boots scraped ice as I backed toward the entrance, never lowering the barrel. That was when the first stone fell. A chunk of ice cracked free from above, smashing into the floor at my side. Shards scattered, slicing through the fabric on my arm. I didn't flinch, just shifted my stance, eyes scanning the ceiling. The second stone fell, then a third. Not random collapses. These were timed, deliberate. The mountain was pushing me back outside, or something in it wanted me gone. I stumbled out into the gray daylight, heart pounding. Snow whipped across the ridge, biting through every layer of clothing. I turned once more toward the cave. The symbols glistened faintly within, twisting like something alive beneath the ice. And I knew then that this wasn't some natural refuge. It was a den. I pressed on. The slope angled into a valley littered with boulders, half buried under snowdrifts. At first thought they were rocks. Then I realized some were too smooth, too rounded, too out of place in the fractured terrain. I brushed snow away from one as I passed. Bone. A skull larger than any animal I'd ever seen, pitted and fractured as though chewed. The valley was a graveyard. I moved faster, boots crunching through layers of snow and bone. Shadows shifted between the stones, shapes almost visible if I stared too long. The stink of rot clung thicker here, caught in my throat until my eyes watered. That was when I saw the trail. Large depressions in the snow leading deeper into the valley. Not the same irregular prints I'd seen circling camp. These were clearer now, as though the creature no longer cared about concealment. Each impression sank knee-deep, wide enough to swallow both my boots side by side. I should have turned away. My mission was survival, not pursuit, but discipline warred with instinct. I couldn't ignore a trail this fresh. Following tracks had kept me alive through a dozen war zones. To not follow now felt like betraying everything I'd been trained to do, so I followed. The valley narrowed, walls rising on either side until I was funneled into a canyon. The prints led straight ahead, no hesitation, no deviation. I moved cautiously, rifle up, eyes sweeping the ridges above. The air grew colder, unnaturally so, the kind of cold that feels like pressure rather than temperature. My teeth ached with it. Halfway through the canyon, I heard it again. Not knocking, not whispering. This was a scrape, long claws dragging across stone, echoing above me. I froze, pressing against the canyon wall, searching for movement. Snow drifted lazily from ledges, shadows twisted. And then, directly above, something leaned over the ridge. I saw it clear this time. The creature's face, covered in thick white fur, matted with ice, skin beneath as gray as the stone, a mouth filled with jagged teeth, lips curled back in something too close to a grin. But it was the eyes that broke me. Human, not in shape, in focus, intelligent, calculating. I raised my rifle. It vanished before I could fire. A shower of snow and ice tumbled down where it had been, pelting my helmet, stinging my face. I sprinted forward, lungs burning, boots slipping on hidden ice. The canyon twisted, narrowed further. Behind me, I heard the thud of something massive dropping from ledge to floor. It was following, no longer circling, no longer teasing, pursuing. My breath came harsh, sharp in my ears. I forced myself to slow just enough not to stumble. Panic kills, discipline saves. Every step calculated, every corner checked. But the thuds grew closer, shaking snow loose from the canyon walls. I rounded a bend and froze. Ahead, the canyon dead-ended. A wall of sheer ice, rising meters above, slick and unscalable without tools I no longer carried. Trapped, the thuds stopped. Silence. I turned slowly, rifle up, nothing. Empty canyon, white snow, black shadows. My pulse hammered. Sweat chilled instantly inside my gear. I scanned every crack, every ledge, every crevice. Then came the sound. Not from behind, from above. I tilted my head back just as it dropped from the ridge. Massive. White. A blur of muscle and claw. I fired reflexively, 3 shots, muzzle flash blinding against the ice. The rounds struck, I heard impact, but the creature barely flinched. It crashed into the snow 10 meters away, sending a shockwave of powder into the air. Up close, its size was impossible. At least 3 meters tall, shoulders broad as a door, arms too long, ending in claws that gleamed like polished stone. Its breath steamed in thick clouds, carrying that rancid rot that made me gag even through my scarf. It roared. The sound wasn't just noise. It was pressure, vibrating through my bones, shaking the rifle in my hands. My knees buckled. The canyon walls groaned. And then it charged. I dove sideways, rolling into the snow, firing again. Bullets tore into fur, but the beast barely staggered. Its claws raked stone where I'd been a second before, slicing gouges meters long. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline burning away cold, mind racing through options. I couldn't kill it head-on, not with bullets, not with strength, but the canyon could. I aimed higher this time, not at the beast, but at the ice wall behind it. Short, controlled bursts, each shot cracking stone and ice. The wall shuddered, groaned. The creature roared again, lunging toward me. I fired one last shot into a fissure. The wall broke. A cascade of snow and ice collapsed between us, thundering down like an avalanche, cutting off the beast's charge. I staggered back, shielding my face as shards tore at my gear. The canyon filled with choking white haze. When the rumble finally settled, a mound of snow separated me from the creature. I could still hear it. Roaring, claws raking, pounding against the wall I'd created. It wasn't dead, not even close, but it was trapped. For now, I turned, chest heaving, and pressed myself against the far canyon wall. My rifle was nearly empty. My body wrung out. And as I listened to the muffled sound of claws scraping closer, I realized the truth. I had survived the first confrontation, but the mountain wasn't finished with me. The avalanche wall I'd created shuddered with each impact of its claws. The sound was deafening in the canyon, stone splitting, ice cracking, the mountain itself groaning in protest. My pulse pounded so hard I could barely hear my own breath. I forced myself to step back, scanning for an escape. The dead end was no longer a dead end. As I pressed deeper against the canyon wall, I noticed a narrow fissure splitting off to the left, nearly concealed under a crust of ice, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. Another impact boomed from the other side of the snow wall. A claw punched through, talons glinting before retreating. That was all the encouragement I needed. I shouldered my rifle, dropped my pack to slim my profile, and pressed into the fissure. The stone was cold, unyielding, tearing at my shoulders as I shoved through. My chest scraped, ribs compressed, lungs crushed against the rock. For a moment, panic clawed at me harder than the beast ever could. I forced myself to exhale, to shrink, to keep moving. The crack widened after a few meters, opening into a tunnel slick with frozen moisture. The air here was different, warmer, ranker, like breath from something long buried. I paused, chest heaving, ears straining. Behind me, the pounding continued, muffled but relentless. Ahead, silence. I moved. The tunnel twisted deeper into the mountain, the ceiling low enough to scrape my helmet. My boots slipped on patches of ice, echoing louder than I wanted. Every sound seemed amplified here, bouncing back at me as though unseen throats were repeating my movements in whispers. After what felt like an hour but was likely minutes, I entered a chamber. The walls were smooth, unnaturally so, as if shaped not by water or wind, but by hands. My flashlight beam cut across them, revealing more of those carved symbols, spirals, circles, marks that seemed to shift if I stared too long, and bones, piles of them, half frozen, scattered along the edges, some animal, but many not. Human rib cages collapsed inward, femurs split as if cracked open for marrow. Skulls grinned from the ice, teeth stained dark. I froze, rifle raised, every muscle taut. My throat burned from holding breath. The stench of rot was suffocating now, thick enough to taste. Then I heard it. Not claws this time, not breath. A voice, low, guttural, drawn out, not words I recognized, but syllables that pulsed in rhythm, like chanting. It vibrated through the chamber, through my bones. I swept the light, searching for movement. Nothing, just bones, symbols, ice. But the sound grew louder, and then it changed, from chanting into something else, into a word I understood, my Naric. It wasn't the same whisper from the night before. This was fuller, resonant, filling the chamber, a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere. I clenched my teeth, forced my finger off the trigger. Shooting shadows would waste what little I had left. Discipline. Always discipline. I began backing toward the tunnel. My light shook despite my grip, beam darting across bones and ice. That was when I saw the movement. At the far end of the chamber, half shrouded in darkness, something unfolded from the wall. For a heartbeat, I thought it was part of the stone. Then it stepped forward. The creature. Closer than ever, and somehow larger in the confined space. Its head nearly brushed the ceiling, shoulders broad enough to block half the chamber. Its fur was matted with ice, its claws dripping meltwater that hissed as it struck the stone. It didn't charge, didn't roar. It just stood there, staring, those eyes locked on mine again, intelligent, merciless. It raised one claw, slow, deliberate, and dragged it across the wall. The sound was unbearable, a shriek that set my teeth on edge. Sparks flared where claw met stone. Then it stopped, lowered its hand, and smiled, not a snarl, not a baring of teeth, a smile. I felt my stomach drop, deeper than fear. This wasn't just a predator. This was something that understood cruelty, that enjoyed it. The chanting returned, this time from its throat, a guttural rhythm that echoed off the chamber walls. Louder, louder, until it drowned out my thoughts. I moved, turned, sprinted back into the tunnel, boots slipping, shoulders slamming stone. Behind me, the roar erupted. Not just sound, but force, chasing me through the narrow passage like a shockwave. I burst into daylight, gasping, stumbling into snow. My lungs seized at the sudden cold. The canyon behind me shook with the creature's fury, its roar rattling loose snow from ledges. But it didn't follow. Not yet. I staggered, half crawled to the ridge above, using hands and boots like claws, dragging myself upward until I collapsed on flat ground. My vision swam, breath tearing at my throat. When I finally looked back, the canyon was quiet. The tunnel's black mouth gaped like a wound in the mountain. No movement, no sound. But I knew it wasn't gone. It had let me go. And that terrified me more than any chase. I pushed onward, body trembling, every nerve raw. The sun was sinking again, painting the peaks in blood-red light. Night was coming, and I had nowhere left to hide. The mountains stretched endless before me. My legs moved on instinct alone, a soldier's endurance carrying me where willpower should have failed. But all the while I could feel it. The eyes. Watching. Waiting. Letting me walk further into a wilderness that was no longer just snow and stone, but a trap it had prepared long before I ever set foot here. The sun dropped behind the serrated peaks, and the world turned black. Not the darkness of night I'd known on deployments in deserts or jungles. This was something else. The Himalayan night doesn't creep in, it swallows whole. The snow no longer glowed pale, the ridges no longer cut sharp lines. Everything blurred into shadow, the horizon dissolving into void. I forced myself to keep moving, though each step grew heavier. My body screamed for rest, but I knew better. Stopping meant waiting, and waiting meant giving it the chance to close the distance. Discipline said, never give the enemy time. But as the night deepened, another enemy rose, my own mind. The silence pressed harder. Each crunch of snow beneath my boots was magnified until it sounded like bones breaking. My breath rasped so loudly it seemed to echo across the valley. I clenched my jaw, trying to steady the rhythm, but the more I focused, the more unnatural it became. Too fast, too shallow, like I was no longer breathing on my own. Then came the smell. It drifted on a wind that didn't stir the snow, the unmistakable stench of decay. Sweet, cloying, rotted. I yanked my scarf higher, but it filled my mouth anyway, coating my tongue. I gagged, swallowed hard, pushed forward. The first whisper came just after. Eric. Soft, from behind. I spun, rifle raised, scanning the black ridges. Nothing. My beam cut only snow and shadow. Eric. This time from the side. Closer. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached. It wasn't my name. Not anymore. It was a weapon. A reminder that it knew me. That I was already marked. I turned back and froze. Ahead of me, in the darkness, stood a line of shapes. Human shapes. 7 of them. Shoulder to shoulder, blocking the path. Their forms were blurred by shadow, but their postures were unmistakable. They were the researchers, the ones I'd lost days before. Hold your ground, I whispered to myself, the same words I'd muttered in ambush zones. Evaluate. Confirm. I lifted my light. The beam struck faces, pale, frozen, hollow-eyed. Their skin hung loose, lips black with frostbite, eyes sunk in sockets filled with ice. But they weren't still. They swayed gently as if a wind touched them that I couldn't feel. I stumbled back a step, my boot crunching snow. Every one of their heads snapped toward me at once. The motion was too sharp, too perfect. Not human. Eric. This time the voices came from their mouths, all at once. My name repeated 7 times, layered into a chorus that rattled my ribs. I fired. Reflex. 3 shots. Skulls shattered, ice spraying, the forms collapsed into snow, vanishing like they'd never been. My beam cut across empty ground, empty. But my magazine was 3 rounds lighter. I hissed through my teeth, reloaded, and pressed forward. My hands trembled despite years of training, not from fear of combat, from fear of madness. Because what I'd seen, what I'd shot, had felt real. And if my mind was breaking, then the mountain had already won. The chanting returned just after. Faint at first, a rhythm beneath the wind, louder with each step. The same guttural syllables from the chamber, now rolling across the valley like thunder. The ground seemed to vibrate with it, snow trembling beneath my boots. And then I saw it. Atop the ridge, silhouetted against a sliver of moonlight. The creature. Massive. Towering. Arms spread wide as though embracing the night itself. Its roar carried not just sound, but the same rhythm as the chant. A summons, a declaration. The mountain answered. Snow shifted all around me, shapes rising from the drifts. Not living, not breathing. Corpses, frozen solid, jerked upright as though pulled by invisible strings. Their jaws hung open, black ice crusting their lips. They turned toward me in unison. Every instinct screamed to fire, to cut them down. But training overruled. Ammunition was life. Life was rationed. I backed up, scanning, calculating. Their movements were jerky, uncoordinated, but there were too many. The ridge loomed behind me. No choice. I turned and scrambled upward, clawing with boots and gloves. The snow gave way, slid, threatened to pull me down, but adrenaline drove me higher. Below, the corpses swarmed, staggering but relentless, clawing after me with stiff arms. Above, the creature watched, silent now, patient. I reached the ridge, hauled myself over the lip, and collapsed against the stone. My chest heaved, lungs burning, eyes stinging from sweat that froze instantly. When I looked up, it was gone. No silhouette, no roar, just emptiness. The corpses below had vanished too. The valley lay still, untouched, as though nothing had stirred. Only my boot prints marked the snow, and that was somehow worse. I staggered to my feet, every muscle trembling. The cold gnawed deeper now, as if feeding on my exhaustion. My thoughts frayed, unraveling with each breath. I wanted to rest, to lay down and let the mountain take me. But I knew that was what it wanted. The whisper came again, closer than ever, right at my ear. Eric. I spun, swung the rifle, and froze. There was nothing, just the vast white silence of the mountain. But I felt it, breath on my neck, warm, rancid, undeniable. And I knew then it wasn't behind me, it was with me, inside the cold, inside the silence, inside the mountain itself. I gripped my rifle tighter, knuckles white, and forced my legs forward. Because if I stopped, if I surrendered, then I wouldn't just die here. I'd join the chorus, and I refused to give it my voice. The night stretched without end. I don't know how many hours I walked, or if I even walked at all. The mountain plays tricks with time. Shadows don't move, stars don't shift. The cold seeps so deep that it dulls the rhythm of your own heart. At one point, I looked down and saw that my footprints trailed off behind me in circles, as if I had been walking in a loop. That was when dread sank in fully. I wasn't heading down, I wasn't getting closer to safety. I was being led, herded. I forced myself to stop, to crouch low behind a boulder jutting from the snow. The air was still, too still. My breath rose in frantic clouds, betraying me. I steadied it, pressed my back against the stone, and listened. For a moment. Nothing. Then, faint but clear, the crunch of snow, deliberate, pacing. I peered over the rock, heart hammering. At first, I saw only the familiar expanse of white, the jagged silhouettes of ridges. Then, in the middle distance, something moved. Not fast, not even cautious. A tall, pale figure gliding across the snow with unnatural ease, leaving deep impressions in its wake. The creature. It stopped, slowly turned its head as if it already knew exactly where I hid. The eyes caught the faint starlight and locked to mine. I ducked, throat tight. I couldn't stay put. Not now. I broke cover, sprinting toward the nearest incline. The snow clawed at my boots, dragging me down with each step. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed, but I kept moving. The sound behind me grew louder, snow exploding under massive strides, claws raking across stone. I reached the slope and scrambled upward, fingers tearing through powder to find holds. My rifle swung across my chest, banging against rock, nearly pulling me off balance. I climbed anyway, boots slipping, palms bleeding inside torn gloves. Halfway up, I risked a glance back. It was climbing after me. Not running, not scrambling. Climbing with deliberate patience as though the mountain itself bent to its will. Every hold that crumbled under my weight seemed solid under its claws. Every stone that shifted for me anchored it. My pulse roared in my ears. Panic threatened to overtake me, but I shoved it down, forced my training back into place. Options. Always options. Above, a narrow ledge. If I could reach it, I could funnel it, control its approach. I hauled myself upward, teeth gritted against pain, until I rolled onto the ledge. I braced against the rock, rifle up, sight fixed on the path it would have to take. Seconds stretched. Then its head rose over the lip. Those eyes, unblinking, meeting mine. I fired. Round after round cracked into its chest, its face, its shoulders. Chunks of fur and ice burst away. But it didn't stop. It kept climbing, but expression unchanged, as though the bullets were nothing but snowflakes. My rifle clicked empty. I cursed, dropped the mag, slammed in another. By the time I raised it again, it was there. A claw swept across the ledge, gouging stone where my head had been a second before. I rolled, scrambled, fired point blank. The roar that followed was so loud it rattled my bones. Its hand swung again, catching my shoulder. Pain exploded, white hot, as I was hurled against the rock wall. My vision blurred. I forced myself to focus, to stand. My arm hung useless, screaming with every movement, but my legs still obeyed. The creature loomed before me, filling the ledge, blocking all escape. Its breath washed over me in rancid clouds, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. For a heartbeat, I thought it would strike again, but instead it stopped, tilted its head, studied me. And then it spoke, not in words I understood. A guttural string of sounds, vibrating with meaning I felt more than heard, but threaded through it. My name. Eric. The ledge swayed beneath me, or maybe my legs did. Hearing my name from its mouth, shaped by that inhuman throat, shattered something inside me. I staggered back, mind fraying. My fingers squeezed the trigger again, though I knew it was useless. The bullets cracked, sparks dancing off stone, until the rifle clicked empty again. The creature didn't flinch. It leaned closer, so close I could see frost clinging to each strand of fur, so close the heat of its breath scalded my frozen skin. And it whispered. Not my name this time. Something else. A word I didn't know. A word that sank into my bones like a command. My knees buckled. I dropped, rifle clattering against stone. It didn't strike. Didn't kill. It simply turned. Massive frame melting back into shadow, vanishing down the slope with impossible grace. I lay there shaking, broken, my breath ragged. My shoulder throbbed, my ears rang, my mind reeled. It had spared me. Why? The question cut deeper than any wound. Survival had always been about logic, tactics, predictable patterns, but nothing about this was logical. The mountain, the voices, the creature, they didn't just hunt. They chose. I staggered upright, retrieved my rifle with trembling hands, and forced myself down the other side of the ridge. I didn't know where I was going anymore. Downhill, maybe? Toward safety, maybe. But with every step, one truth gnawed at me. It had let me go. Not out of mercy, not out of weakness, out of intent. And whatever that intent was, I was carrying it with me. I descended in a haze, my shoulders screaming with each movement, my head swimming with exhaustion and disbelief. The cold gnawed deeper now, not just into my skin, but into thought itself. The line between memory and hallucination thinned until I wasn't sure if my boots were striking real snow or if I'd been walking in place for hours. The moon lit little of the world around me. Clouds dragged low across the peaks, blotting the stars, casting everything in shifting gray. Shapes moved at the edges of my vision, ridges bending, shadows lengthening, figures that dissolved the moment I focused on them. I told myself they weren't real, but the smell told me otherwise. The stench of rot clung to the wind, thicker with each step. It was everywhere now, not drifting from one direction, but surrounding me, pressing against my lungs like smoke. I pulled the scarf tighter, but it was useless. The stink had become the air itself. I paused at a slope where ice fractured into a scatter of frozen boulders. My knees trembled, threatening to give way. I wanted to rest, just for a minute, but instinct screamed that resting here meant death. I scanned the terrain, every nerve alert, nothing moved, no sound carried. And then, crunch. Snow behind me. A single deliberate step. I spun, rifle raised, the stock slick in my frozen gloves. The beam of my light cut across the slope. Empty. Crunch. This time to my left. Closer. I pivoted, sight sweeping the darkness. My pulse thundered, vision narrowed into a tunnel. Nothing. Only the endless white. Eric. The voice came from everywhere at once, vibrating through stone, through air, through me. My teeth rattled with it. I turned in circles, desperate, rifle swinging wildly. The ground shifted beneath me, snow sliding, and I barely caught myself before tumbling into a crevasse hidden at my feet. It was toying with me now, driving me where it wanted me to go. I staggered forward, half sliding down the slope. The wind rose, shrieking between jagged peaks, carrying that same rhythm, that same chant I had heard in the chamber. It wasn't words, not truly. It was intent, shaping the storm itself. And beneath it all, the crunch of pursuit. Slow, patient. I ran. Every step sent knives of pain through my shoulder. My legs quaked under the strain, my lungs seared, each breath tearing like glass. But still I ran. The slope dipped, funneling me into another valley. My boots punched deep holes in the snow. I didn't care if the sound carried. It already knew where I was. The valley opened wider, framed by black cliffs on either side. And at its center stood something impossible. A structure, stone columns rising from the snow, half buried but unmistakably shaped. Not natural, too straight, too deliberate. A circle of them, leaning inward like the ribs of some titanic carcass. I stumbled closer, disbelief warring with exhaustion. The stones were carved, symbols etched deep, the same spirals and intersecting lines I had seen in the cave. My light traced across them, and for a moment I swore they shifted, crawling across the surface like living things. The smell was unbearable here. It coated the snow, seeped into my clothes, filled every breath. I gagged, nearly collapsing to my knees, and then I heard it again. The voice, closer now, not from behind, from within the circle. Eric? I lifted my rifle, stepped inside the ring of stones. The air changed immediately. Heavy, pressed down against me like water. My ears popped, my vision blurred. The snow inside the circle was stained dark, patches of red frozen into the ice. At the center of the ring, half buried beneath snow, lay a pile of bones. Human. Skulls stacked, ribs jutting outward, frozen fingers interlocked like some obscene monument. And standing behind them, the creature. It rose to its full height, towering above the stones, its fur catching what little moonlight broke through the clouds. Its eyes glowed faintly, not with reflection, but with their own inner light. I raised my rifle, finger tightening on the trigger, but it didn't move. Instead, it spoke again. Not my name this time. A string of guttural sounds that reverberated through my chest. My knees shook. The symbols on the stones seemed to pulse, glowing faintly, their spirals spinning in rhythm with its voice. And then, clear, unmistakable, the last word. Eric. I fired. The shots cracked like thunder, muzzle flash illuminating the stones, the bones, the beast. The rounds struck. I saw them hit, saw fur and flesh tear, but the creature didn't falter. Its roar erupted, a blast of sound that shook the stones, knocked me to my knees. The snow collapsed inward. The monument of bones toppled. The ground itself gave way. I fell. Down into darkness, into ice, into a pit carved by forces older than memory. My light flickered, spinning across smooth walls etched with spirals that went on forever. My body slammed against snow, pain tearing through every nerve. Above me, at the edge of the pit, the creature loomed. Its claws dug into the stone as it leaned down, staring into the hole, and it smiled, that same human smile. Then it turned, vanishing into the storm. I lay in the pit, broken, bleeding, staring up at the black mouth above. Snow drifted down, burying me grain by grain. The chant echoed from the stones, from the ice, from inside my skull, and I realized the truth. It hadn't been hunting me. Not really. It had been bringing me here. Snow trickled down on me, each flake like a grain of sand dropping into an hourglass. My shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, ribs stabbing when I tried to breathe. I tried to move, to climb, but the walls of the pit were sheer, polished by centuries of ice. My gloves slid uselessly over the spirals carved into the walls, spirals that seemed to shimmer faintly as if lit from within. I sat in the cold, staring upward. The mouth of the pit was already smaller, snow blowing across it, threatening to seal me inside. The storm howled overhead, and beneath it I could still hear the chant. Not loud now, but steady, a rhythm that matched the pounding of my pulse. I wasn't dead. Not yet. And that was the problem. I forced myself to think. Options. Always options. The climb was impossible. Ammunition nearly gone, my body failing. But surrender was death. So I dragged myself to the wall, pressed a palm against the spiral. The ice burned hot against my glove, searing through fabric, forcing me to yank back with a hiss. When I looked, the spiral had changed, the lines twisted, bending inward like a tunnel within the wall. My light caught depth that hadn't been there before, a path leading down into blackness. The air shifted. Warmth exhaled from that impossible spiral, carrying the same fetid stink of rot. My gut twisted, every instinct screaming to turn away. But above me, the storm sealed the pit, snow drifting faster, the sky fading. There was no way back, so I went down. I pressed my shoulder into the spiral and pushed. The ice gave way, softening like flesh. I stumbled forward, falling through. When I caught myself, I was in a tunnel. Smooth walls, carved symbols pulsing faintly, air thick and damp. The sound was louder here, not the chant of wind, voices. Many voices, overlapping, echoing, threading through the tunnels like veins. Some I didn't recognize, some too guttural to be human, and some I did, clear, familiar. The researchers. Their voices called my name, begged for help, wept and screamed and laughed all at once. My legs faltered, but I forced them forward. Step by step, deeper into the mountain's gut. The tunnel widened into another chamber, vast and hollow. The ceiling arched high above, vanishing into shadow. Stalactites dripped black water into a frozen pool at the center, and around the pool lay bodies. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Frozen stiff, tangled together, faces turned upward. Their mouths gaped open, and from them came the voices. All of them speaking, whispering, chanting in unison. The sound rose and fell, carrying words I couldn't understand, until it bent, reshaped, became my name. Eric. The bodies' eyes snapped open all at once. Frost shattered from their lashes. Blue-white light burned in their sockets, blinding. I staggered back, shielded my face. My rifle slipped from numb hands, clattering across the ice. And then the water in the pool rippled. The surface bulged upward, splitting, and something began to rise. Massive arms, longer than any human's, dripping with black liquid, a chest broad as a wall, fur matted with centuries of rot. And that head, those eyes. The same creature, but larger now, impossibly so, as though the mountain itself had birthed it whole. It stepped from the pool, water hissing into steam around its claws, its gaze locked on mine, and for the first time I didn't just see intelligence in those eyes. I saw recognition. It knew me. Not just my name. Me. I tried to move, to run, but my legs failed. The chamber shook with each of its steps. Bones cracked under its weight, voices screamed louder, the chant rising to a deafening crescendo. It leaned down, lowering its face until I could see my reflection in its black pupils. My cracked lips, bloodied skin, hollow eyes. A man already half dead. And then it spoke again. This time, not just my name. A full sentence. The words warped, guttural, but I understood them anyway. You are ours. The voices echoed the phrase. Hundreds of mouths repeating. The sound rattled my skull, tore at my mind. I pressed hands to my ears, but it was inside me now, vibrating through bone. I dropped to my knees, not from choice, from command. The creature's claw reached out, slow, deliberate, curling beneath my chin. It lifted my head until I was forced to meet its gaze. My body trembled, every nerve screaming, but my mind cracked. For a moment I saw what it saw, the mountain, the endless white, the chambers beneath, filled with bones and whispers, centuries of hunger, of worship, of prey dragged down, broken, made part of the chorus. I saw the researchers, their faces stretched in frozen agony, voices stolen to feed the chant. And then I saw myself, not as I was, as I would be. My body lying among the others, eyes glowing blue, mouth open, chanting forever. I ripped away with the last thread of will I had, grabbed the rifle from the ice, fired point blank into its face. The chamber exploded with sound. The beast roared, claws sweeping wide, sending me flying across the stone. My head cracked against the wall, vision blurring into stars, but the bullet had struck. Not to kill, nothing could kill it, but to wound. One of its eyes dimmed, black blood hissing as it struck the ice. It staggered back into the pool, water boiling, steam rising. The voices screamed, higher, shriller, until they snapped into silence, and the chamber was still. I lay on the ice, chest heaving, every limb refusing to move. My vision swam. My ears rang. Above me, the ceiling groaned. Cracks split the stone. Snow poured in streams. The mountain itself was collapsing. I crawled, dragging myself toward the tunnel, every motion agony. Behind me, the pool churned, boiling, the beast's roar echoing one last time. Not defeated, not dead, just angry. I pulled myself through the tunnel, the spirals glowing brighter, pulsing faster. The walls shook, stones falling, striking sparks. My lungs burned, throat raw, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. When I burst back into the pit, snow had sealed most of the mouth. A narrow shaft of gray light cut down, just wide enough for one man. I clawed upward, nails tearing through gloves, boots slipping, body screaming. My shoulder gave way, pain flaring white. But I climbed, inch by inch. The roar followed me, shaking the pit, rattling snow loose in waves. Black steam billowed from the tunnel below. Claws scraped stone. It was coming. I hauled myself toward the light, blood dripping into the snow. My fingers caught the edge. My body dangled, every muscle failing. And then, with the last ounce of strength left in me, I dragged myself up. I rolled into the storm above, snow slamming into my face, wind howling so loud it drowned the roar beneath. I lay there, staring at the black sky, lungs heaving, alive. But when I looked back at the pit, the snow was rising, filling, sealing it completely. The spirals glowed once more, then vanished under white. The mountain went silent. I staggered to my feet, broken, hollow, and began walking again, downhill, toward a horizon I might never reach. But I knew one thing. It wasn't over. It had let me go once. It had marked me, and wherever I went, whatever valley or city or country I crawled back to, its voice would follow. Eric. I don't remember how I got down. Only fragments. Stumbling through valleys, collapsing in drifts, waking to the sting of snow against my face. Hours, days, they blurred into one long march. My body was broken, but my legs kept moving. Maybe it wasn't me driving them anymore. Maybe it was the mountain pushing me where it wanted me to go. Eventually, I saw smoke, a thin line against the white horizon. I followed it, half blind, until I stumbled into a camp of Sherpa guides. Their faces froze when they saw me. Not just because of the state I was in, frostbitten, bleeding, eyes wild, but because they recognized something. They carried me back down the range, wrapped in blankets, their voices low, never meeting my eyes for long. In the weeks that followed, in a hospital bed far from the snow, I tried to explain. They told me I'd been found alone, raving, rifle empty, clothes stinking of rot no one else could smell. They told me no trace of the researchers was ever found. Just scattered gear, torn tents, snow pressed flat as if nothing had ever stood there. The official report listed it as exposure, a storm too sudden to predict, a tragedy of nature. That was the story they wanted. That was the story the world could accept. But I know better. Even now, months later, I wake in the night and taste the stench of decay in the air. I hear the whisper in my dreams, not always in my language, but always with intent. Sometimes I hear the researchers too, their voices tangled with mine. Sometimes I wake with frost on my sheets, though the heater runs all night, and always at the edge of sleep I hear it. The chant. Low, rhythmic, waiting. I've stopped telling anyone about it. Doctors think it's trauma. Survivors, guilt. They nod, prescribe, reassure, but their eyes flicker, as if they see something deeper in me. Something I carried down from the mountain. I still dream of that pit, of the bones piled high, the glowing spirals etched into walls, and of its face lowering toward mine, smiling like a man who knows your future better than you ever will. I survived. But the survival isn't victory. Survival is being chosen to carry a burden no one else can see. I walk among crowds now, city streets filled with noise and life, and yet I feel eyes on me. Not human, not near, but always there. Sometimes I catch my reflection in windows. Sometimes it isn't me staring back, and when the wind howls through alleys carrying snow even in the wrong season, I hear the word again. Eric. I don't know why it let me live. Mercy? No, there was nothing merciful in its gaze. Curiosity, perhaps, or purpose. I know only this. The mountain never lets go. You can walk away, descend, even fly across oceans, but once it marks you, it follows. Every knock in the dark, every gust of foul wind, every whisper of your own name when no one else is there. That's not imagination. That's not trauma. That's it reminding you that you're never free. I can tell you this because I've lived it, because I'm still living it, and because one day, when you find yourself alone in the wilderness, in silence, too deep for comfort, you'll hear it too. A voice shaped from the cold, from the dark, from something older than the earth itself. It will whisper your name, and you'll understand. The mountain doesn't want your body. It wants your fear, and fear never leaves. My name is Captain Rafael Mendez, though most people who've worked with me just call me Mendez. I'm 41 years old, a former Colombian Special Forces officer who spent more of his life crawling through jungles and deserts than sleeping in a proper bed. These days, I make my living as a private security contractor. It's not glamorous, but it keeps me moving, keeps me away from the silence of empty apartments where memories tend to creep in. This job was supposed to be simple. Babysit a group of geologists for a 2-week survey on a volcanic island at the far end of the Aleutian chain. Get them there, keep them alive, and fly back out. That was all. The paperwork called it uninhabited terrain, but when we first landed, the word that stuck in my head was forgotten. The place looked like it had been abandoned by the world. Gray cliffs rose straight out of the water, waves hammering against them like war drums. Fog rolled over everything, thick and wet, muffling sound so that even the gulls sounded distant. The air smelled of salt and sulfur like a match had just been struck and left to burn. Every breath scratched my throat, and beneath it all, I swear I could feel a low vibration through the soles of my boots, as though the island itself was breathing. I told myself it was the volcanic activity. Geologists get excited about that sort of thing. But I didn't like it. The first night, we made camp near a series of collapsed lava tubes. The scientists were practically giddy, running their instruments, checking readings, marking down notes by headlamp. I kept my distance, scanning the horizon, listening to the wind. It wasn't silence exactly. It was something worse. The kind of quiet that makes you lean in, searching for the thing that's missing. And then I heard it. A sound too low to be wind, too deliberate to be rockfall. A deep pulse, almost like sonar. One long note carried through the stone itself. I froze. No one else seemed to notice. The geologists laughed, traded jokes about magma chambers, but I felt it in my ribs, in my teeth. A resonance, like the world was trying to tune itself to me. That night, I slept with my rifle across my chest. Day 2, one of the junior geologists went missing. Her name was Alina. Quiet, barely spoke above a whisper. She'd been cataloging samples near the collapsed tube. When the others realized she was gone, they thought she had wandered off. I knew better. I found her pack neatly set against the rocks. Her boots were gone, footprints leading into the black mouth of the tunnel. No signs of a struggle, no panic. It was as if she had chosen to walk inside. But the footprints ended just a few meters in. The ash and loose gravel swallowed them, or maybe something else had. I don't know. The tunnel went deeper, too dark for my flashlight to reach the end. And again, that pulse. Stronger this time, almost like it was answering me for stepping inside. I backed out. Fast. When I told the others they wanted to mount a search, I told them no. That tunnel wasn't natural anymore. I could feel it. My training told me to treat it like hostile ground. The lead scientist didn't listen. He said we were here for research, that we had to retrieve her. He said I was being paranoid. I didn't argue. I just loaded extra magazines into my vest and tightened the strap on my rifle. Because whatever had taken her, and I was certain something had, wasn't finished. The next night, the fog rolled in heavier. The temperature dropped fast, sharp enough to make the metal of my rifle bite cold against my palms. The others huddled in their tents, whispering. I stayed up, listening. The pulse came again. Not once, not twice, a rhythm, slow and steady, echoing beneath the rock. And this time, layered on top of it, I swore I heard something like breathing. Wet, ragged, but deliberate. I moved closer to the tunnel entrance, keeping my flashlight off. The darkness there seemed thicker than night, almost fluid. And then I saw movement. not a person, not Alina. Something slid just beyond the range of vision, as though the black itself was bending. My skin prickled, every instinct screaming to fire, but I held. Shooting blind was a good way to die out here. Instead, I whispered, a stupid, reckless thing to do. Alina? The sound that came back wasn't human. It repeated my voice word for word, but slower, distorted, as if the stone itself was speaking. That was the moment I knew we weren't dealing with a cave-in or wildlife or some geological trick. The island was alive, or something beneath it was, and it was listening. I tried to convince the team to leave the next morning. Our sat phone still worked, and we could have called for an early extraction. But scientists are stubborn. They insisted this was seismic resonance, some rare natural phenomenon worth studying. I didn't bother hiding my anger. You don't get it, I told them. This isn't the earth moving. Something's hunting, and we're making noise like idiots in a dark forest. They didn't believe me. They kept drilling samples, running equipment, tapping at rocks with hammers. Every strike echoed like a dinner bell through the volcanic tubes, and I knew, deep down I knew, that something was coming for us. By the fourth day, I was done trying to argue with them. Scientists aren't soldiers. They don't recognize threats until they've swallowed them whole. My job wasn't to win debates, it was to keep them alive. But deep down, I knew the odds were slipping. The fog never lifted. It clung to the rocks, thick enough to bead into droplets on my beard and the barrel of my rifle. Every breath tasted like sulfur and brine. Even the gulls had disappeared. A silence that absolute didn't feel like weather. It felt like the island had decided to listen. I kept catching myself tapping my fingers against the rifle's receiver, a nervous habit I'd picked up during long patrols in Afghanistan. This time, though, every tap echoed back to me through the stone, faint, like something was counting along. That evening, one of the senior scientists, Dr. Kovac, vanished. He'd been logging data on a handheld unit near the lava tube entrance. One of the others swore he saw him crouched down, typing notes. Then the fog thickened, and when it cleared, Kovac was gone. No sound, no struggle, just gone. I found his data tablet sitting neatly on the ground, screen still glowing. The file had ended mid-sentence. He hadn't walked away willingly. The others were terrified, though they tried to mask it with rational explanations. Maybe he fell, one said. Maybe he wandered into the fog. But I checked. There were no tracks leading away, no drag marks, nothing. It was as if the island had opened up and swallowed him whole. That night, we heard his voice. It came from inside the tunnel. Low at first, but distinct. A desperate whisper. Help, please, help me. One of the geologists bolted toward the sound before I could stop him. I grabbed his arm hard enough to bruise and yanked him back. That's not him, I said, my voice cracked despite my effort to stay calm. Do you understand me? That's not him. And then, as if to mock me, the voice changed. The exact same words, but spoken in my tone, my cadence, my voice begging for help. That was the moment I knew we weren't facing an animal. This was something older, smarter. Something that studied us, mirrored us, drew us in the way a spider vibrates its web. By dawn, half the team wanted to leave. The others insisted we stay, said we couldn't abandon the missing, that we had a duty to science. I wanted to scream at them. Duty meant nothing if you were dead. Still, they wouldn't move without proof. And so, against everything my instincts screamed, I agreed to go inside the tunnel. Not with all of them, just me. One man, one rifle. If I didn't come back, they'd have their proof. The mouth of the tunnel yawned like a wound in the earth, jagged rock edges blackened by ancient fire. The air inside was colder, sharp with the stink of sulfur and damp stone. My boots crunched ash, each step echoing farther than it should have. I kept my flashlight off, relying on the faint phosphorescence of moss clinging to the walls. Every few seconds, I'd stop, listen. The silence pressed in, heavy as water. Then it came again, the pulse. Slow, deliberate, vibrating up through the stone into my chest. Not random, rhythmic. A signal. I pushed deeper. After 50 meters, I found scraps of fabric caught on the rock, a sleeve torn from a jacket, a boot print in the ash, fresh enough that the edges hadn't crumbled. Kovacs had been here, maybe Alina too. But then the tunnel forked. One path sloped downward, deeper into the earth. The other twisted left, disappearing into shadow. That's when I realized the pulse wasn't random at all. It was guiding me. Each vibration matched the downward path, like sonar calling me into the dark. I should have turned back. Instead, I made the mistake of taking 3 more steps. That's when I heard it. A scrape against stone. Slow, deliberate, like claws dragging. The sound echoed, magnified, until it seemed to come from every direction at once. My rifle snapped to my shoulder, finger brushing the trigger. The scrape grew louder, closer. I swept the flashlight on. The beam cut across jagged stone, down the black throat of the tunnel, and something moved. At first, it looked like the rock itself was shifting. Then I saw it, a shape too large to make sense, pressed tight against the ceiling. Skin the color of ash, slick and wet, stretched across muscle like cooling lava. No eyes, just a mouth, wide and jagged, teeth like shards of obsidian. It wasn't crawling, it was flowing, folding itself through the stone as if the tunnel was part of its body. The pulse hit again, hard enough to rattle my ribs. And I realized with cold certainty, it wasn't the island breathing. It was this thing. It was talking. I didn't fire, not yet. Bullets in a tunnel are as much a danger to the shooter as the target. Instead, I backed up slow, rifle trained on the shifting mass. That's when it spoke again. Not words, not really, but sound. My voice. Kovacs' voice. Alina's voice. All layered, twisted, repeating. Help me, please help me. It was bait. Pure, perfect bait. The thing unfolded from the wall, long limbs scraping, claws digging trenches in the rock. My training screamed fire now. My gut screamed run. I chose both. I fired a 3-round burst and bolted. The shots cracked like thunder, deafening in the tunnel. The creature screamed, not in pain but in rage, the sound so high and piercing it felt like needles in my skull. I ran blind, boots hammering stone, ears ringing. Behind me, the scrape of claws thundered closer, faster than anything that size should move. I burst out of the tunnel into the fog, gasping, rifle still hot in my hands. The scientists rushed toward me, shouting, pack up, I barked, voice raw. Now, we're leaving, that thing in there. And then the ground shook. A tremor rolled beneath us, violent enough to knock 2 of them flat. From the tunnel mouth came that same scream, a vibration that rattled the air itself. Rocks splintered, ash rained down. The island wasn't just home to it. The island was part of it. And now it was awake. The tremor lasted maybe 10 seconds. That's all. But in those 10 seconds, the island changed. The ground flexed under my boots like muscle tightening. Stone cracked, shedding flakes of black rock. The fog thickened, not rolling but pulsing, pushed outward in waves as though exhaled from deep underground. The scientists panicked. They grabbed cases, samples, whatever they could carry. I didn't wait to herd them. I barked orders, voice cutting through the chaos. Drop the gear. Leave it. Only essentials. We move to the extraction point now. They hesitated, clinging to their research like children clutching toys. I ripped the nearest case from a man's hands and threw it to the ground. Do you want to die here? I roared. My voice cracked from more than anger. Move. That did it. Fear finally outweighed curiosity. We headed toward the small ridge where we had set up the radio. The fog swallowed us almost immediately, visibility shrinking to a few feet. The air grew colder, heavy with the metallic tang of ash. Every step crunched damp gravel, echoed back louder than it should have. I ordered them to stay quiet. But fear makes people clumsy. Their packs rattled, boots scraped, breath came in sharp gasps, and every sound we made was answered. A pulse, from the ground, from the cliffs, from the fog itself. It was tracking us. We reached the ridge an hour later, exhausted and shaking. The portable radio sat under a tarp, battery still connected. One of the scientists scrambled to send a signal, begging for immediate extraction. I kept watch, rifle tight to my shoulder. For a moment, hope flickered. Static gave way to a faint human voice, a crackled reply from the mainland. Extraction ETA, 6 hours. 6 hours until a chopper could cut through the weather. 6 hours in hell. I positioned the group in a tight perimeter around the ridge, backs to the rocks. My eyes scanned the fog. At first, it was just gray, thick and shifting. Then movement, not one shape, dozens. The fog itself seemed to bend, curving around invisible forms that crawled, slithered, folded back into nothing. Every instinct screamed to fire, but I held steady. Ammunition wasn't infinite. Then came the voices, Alina's whisper, Kovacs' laughter. My own barked orders from earlier thrown back at me. The sounds overlapped, layered, echoing from different directions. It was trying to separate us, herd us. One of the younger geologists cracked. He bolted into the fog, calling Alina's name. I lunged for him, fingers grazing his jacket, but he slipped away. His footsteps faded. Then silence. Then the scream. It wasn't long. It cut off sharp, swallowed whole. The rest of us stayed frozen, barely daring to breathe. My hands shook against the rifle, not from fear, though God knows it was there, but from the weight of knowing I couldn't save him. Couldn't save any of them if this kept up. An hour crawled past, then another. The fog never shifted. The pulses came steady, sometimes soft, sometimes hard enough to rattle loose pebbles from the ridge. We were being tested, played with. At one point, the ground opened near the base of the ridge. Not a crack, not an earthquake. It just parted. A fissure splitting wide enough to see molten glow beneath. And from that glow, I swear something looked up at us. Not with eyes. With attention. The geologists huddled tighter, whispering prayers in different languages. I scanned our meager supplies, 2 rifles, limited magazines, 1 flare gun, a few rations, water already running low. 6 hours suddenly felt like 6 lifetimes. The third hour brought the first real attack. The fog thickened until even the man beside me was only a silhouette. Then, silence. No pulse, no breath, just silence. My instinct screamed. I swung the rifle left. Movement. Fast. Low. Something slammed into the ridge wall beside us. Rock exploded in shards. One of the scientists screamed as claws raked across his leg, dragging him off the ground. I fired blind, the muzzle flashlighting gray skin and black teeth for half a heartbeat. The creature recoiled, shrieking. Not wounded, just surprised. It vanished back into the fog, dragging the scientist with it. His scream cut off mid-breath. The others begged me to chase. I didn't. That would have been suicide. The thing wanted me alone, separated. Instead, I reloaded and forced them closer. Stay quiet, I hissed. My own voice barely sounded human anymore. It hears us. The 4th hour, the fog turned against us. It began echoing back our movements. Every shift of a boot, every click of a rifle safety, repeated a second later from the opposite direction. Perfectly mimicked. It made us spin in circles. Weapons raised, adrenaline chewing holes in our nerves. One scientist snapped, shouting into the fog, cursing it, daring it to show itself. It did. Not the whole thing. Just pieces. A limb stretching out of the mist, jagged and too long. A mouth yawning open, teeth sliding like stone grinding. The man fired his pistol wildly. Bullets cracked into nothing. The limb lashed once and he was gone. Just gone. Snatched into the gray. 5 hours. We were down to 4 people. Myself, 3 scientists. The radio crackled every now and then, voices promising extraction soon, but the storm above was worsening. The chopper hadn't even launched yet. My gut told me we wouldn't last. That's when the pulses changed. No longer slow. Faster. Rhythmic. A hunting pace. The ground beneath us thrummed like a war drum. Pebbles danced. My teeth rattled. And I realized it wasn't just tracking anymore. It was closing in. I made a decision. A desperate one. We couldn't survive 6 hours sitting still. Not with it circling. The only chance was to move. To find higher ground, somewhere the fog was thinner. Somewhere the chopper might spot us. I didn't believe in chances anymore. But soldiers don't sit and wait to die. I told the others. They didn't argue this time. Terror had stripped them down to obedience. We packed what little remained, slung rifles in cases, and prepared to descend the ridge. That's when I heard it. A voice, soft, clear, right behind me. Raphael, not shouted, not distorted. My name, spoken perfectly, in Spanish, the way my mother used to say it. I spun, rifle raised, nothing but fog. The scientists stared at me wide-eyed. They hadn't heard it. My hands shook worse than ever. That thing wasn't just imitating anymore. It was inside me. We descended into the fog anyway, because staying still was worse. The island seemed to shift as we moved, stone rearranging itself beneath the mist. Paths we'd taken before were gone, replaced by fissures and ash fields. The pulses guided us like a shepherd's crook, hurting us deeper, whether we wanted it or not. And all the while, the voices grew clearer. Not just Alina, not just Kovacs. Now my squad mates from years past. Names I hadn't heard in decades. Faces of men who died beside me in jungles and deserts, now calling me into the fog. The creature knew me. It was becoming me. When we stumbled onto the flat of volcanic glass, a black plane reflecting what little light seeped through the mist, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. There would be no waiting this out. No surviving 6 hours. This island wasn't just home to the thing. It was the thing, and we were already inside it. The plane stretched out like a mirror to nowhere. Volcanic glass, brittle, fractured, reflecting what little gray light managed to bleed through the fog. Every step crunched sharp beneath our boots, shards splintering, carrying sound farther than I wanted. The surface felt wrong, too smooth in some places, warped in others, as though it had been poured recently, not centuries ago. The geologists whispered about lava flow patterns, about geological oddities. I shut them up fast. Their voices carried too well. The fog pressed in, dense and wet, clinging to my skin. I could barely see 10 meters ahead. My rifle felt too light in my hands, no comfort against something that could flow through stone. But worse than the fog, worse than the brittle plain beneath us, was the silence. The pulses had stopped. For hours we'd been tracked by that steady rhythm. Now, nothing. It wasn't gone. I knew better. It was waiting. We moved in a staggered line, packs stripped down to bare essentials. One man, his name was Becker, I think, carried the flare gun. I kept him close. A flare was our only signal for extraction. Every few minutes, I'd stop, listen. The scientists would freeze, shivering in the cold damp. Nothing. Then we'd move again. I could feel the tension building, coiling tighter with every step. A battlefield sixth sense. The silence before an ambush. And then the fog shifted. Not by wind. It bent, curved inward, forming a hollow space just ahead. A figure stood inside it. At first I thought, Kovacs, his posture, his silhouette. He even had the same jacket. One of the scientists shouted his name and bolted toward him. I tried to grab him, but he slipped my reach. He sprinted across the glass, arms out, calling Kovacs like a brother reunited. I raised my rifle, heart pounding. The figure didn't move. It just stood, waiting. When the scientist reached it, the fog collapsed. The figure unfolded, stretched, erupted into limbs and teeth. The sound, God, the sound was like stone grinding, metal tearing. He screamed once before it dragged him down through the glass as if the ground had liquefied. The surface rippled, then stilled. The plane was whole again. I didn't look away from it. Keep moving, I ordered, voice flat. The others obeyed without protest this time. We pushed on. The silence grew heavier. Then I realized it wasn't silence at all. It was breathing. The plane itself exhaled beneath us, long and low, hot air rising through fissures, carrying the stench of sulfur and rot. With each breath, the fog rippled, shifting like a lung inflating. I forced myself not to react, not to break stride. But inside, panic clawed at my ribs. This wasn't just terrain. We were walking across its body. The second strike came sudden. The glass split under the rearmost geologist's boots. He dropped with a cry, the surface swallowing him waist-deep. His hands clawed the edge, blood smearing black stone. I spun and grabbed him, but before I could pull, something jerked from below. Hard, fast. His ribs cracked against the edge. His scream cut off as he was yanked under. The fissure sealed itself shut. Only a smear of blood remained on the glass. The other two scientists were sobbing now, broken. I couldn't blame them. My own hands trembled against the rifle. I checked the horizon. Nothing but fog and black stone. No landmarks, no direction. But the ground still sloped upward, barely. Higher ground had to be ahead. I clung to that like a lifeline. We trudged on. Step by step, the plane gnawed at our nerves. Once I heard my own voice again, clear as a bell calling from behind me. Mendez, over here. The scientist to my left nearly bolted toward it. I slammed him to the ground, pinning him with my knee. He fought me, wild-eyed, whispering, "That was you. I heard you. It was you." "Shut up," I hissed, pressing cold steel of the rifle barrel to his chest until he froze. "If you move again, you'll kill us both. Do you understand?" Tears streaked his face, but he nodded. He stayed close after that. Hours blurred, hunger gnawed, thirst burned. My mind drifted in and out, caught between hyperfocus and exhaustion. Then, finally, the slope grew steeper. The fog thinned, just enough to see jagged silhouettes above. Cliffs. Higher ground. Relief hit like a drug. I almost smiled. Almost. We climbed slow, scrambling over shards of glass and loose rock. Every scrape of boot and rattle of gravel echoed, carrying into the fog below. And the fog answered. The pulses returned. Faster now. Urgent. It was climbing after us. We reached the top just as the plain below began to ripple, whole sections folding inward like waves. Shapes pressed against the fog, massive and shifting, mouths yawning wide enough to swallow boulders whole. The two scientists collapsed on the ridge, gasping. I checked the radio. Dead. Static only. The flare gun was our last chance. I grabbed Becker's arm. "Now," I barked. "Fire it. Straight up." He fumbled it out, hands shaking so bad I thought he'd drop it, but the flare fired, streaking red into the gray sky. It lit the fog in hellish crimson, shadows writhing inside it like worms in firelight, and from the plain below came a scream. Not a human scream. The scream of stone itself splitting, air torn apart, the sound so powerful I dropped to my knees, clutching my skull. The ridge cracked beneath us. Shards rained down. One of the scientists tumbled with them, his shriek fading into the fog below. When I staggered to my feet, only Becker and I remained. We stood together at the cliff's edge, staring at the black plain shifting beneath us. The fog churned with shapes, hundreds of them, all moving, all watching. The flare still burned faint above, its light barely piercing the storm. "We're not getting out," Becker whispered, voice hollow. His eyes were wide, glassy. "It won't let us leave." I gripped my rifle, though I knew it was useless. My training told me to keep fighting, to improvise. But my gut told me he was right. The island was alive, the plain was its body, the fog its breath, the voices its bait, and we were nothing but insects caught in its lungs. Still, I forced the words out. "We wait for the chopper. That's the plan. That's the only plan." Becker laughed. High, broken. "Look." I followed his gaze. The flare light reflected off the fog, and in that light, far above, I saw it. A face. Not human, not animal. Carved of stone and ash, vast as a mountain, staring down through the storm. Its mouth opened, wide enough to swallow the sky. The flare guttered out, darkness crashed back, and the island exhaled. The flare was gone. The light snuffed out as if the sky had swallowed it whole. Only the fog remained, blacker now, thicker, pressing in close enough to feel damp against my lips. My lungs burned with every breath. The stench of sulfur and rot clung to the back of my throat. Beside me, Becker whispered a prayer I didn't recognize. His voice shook so hard I could barely make out the words. He kept staring into the fog like it would part and reveal salvation. But all I saw were shadows shifting, shapes folding in on themselves, never quite real and never fully gone. I checked my rifle. 2 magazines left, maybe 50 rounds total. Enough to fight a man. Enough to fight a bear. Worthless against this. Still, the weight of it grounded me. I forced my breathing slow, forced my thoughts back to procedure. Survive until extraction. That was the mission now. Nothing else mattered. Hours blurred. The ridge was narrow, jagged stone cutting through the mist. Below us, the plain churned, glowing faintly with molten veins. The fog rose in waves, alive, thickening whenever we moved, thinning whenever we froze, like it was waiting for us to make the wrong sound. At some point, Becker snapped. His voice cracked out of the dark, too loud. "We're not leaving here, Mendez. You know it. You know it." "Quiet," I hissed, my hand locked on his shoulder, squeezing. "It hears us." He shoved me off, wild-eyed. "It doesn't matter. Look around. Look." He gestured to the fog, the plain, the black sky above. "This isn't an island. This is hell. We're already dead." I wanted to hit him, to silence him, but before I could, the ground pulsed again. Hard, strong enough to rattle my teeth. The entity was listening. The ridge split. A crack tore open just meters away, jagged and glowing, spewing hot gas. The stone groaned like bones breaking under weight. Out of the fissure crawled limbs, too long, too thin, slick with black sheen. Claws scraped sparks against the rock. Becker screamed and opened fire. His rifle spat fire into the fog, muzzle flash lighting the creature as it unfolded. Not a body, not a single form, just a tangle of mouths and arms and shifting stone, folding in and out of itself like it couldn't decide on a shape. The noise drew more. The fog bent inward, dozens of shapes pressing close. The ground pulsed faster, pounding like a heart beneath us. I grabbed Becker's rifle, forcing it down. "Stop! You're drawing it!" Too late. A limb lashed out, claws slicing deep across Becker's chest. He convulsed, gasped, blood spraying hot across my face. His body was dragged backward, vanishing into the fog in less than a heartbeat, and just like that, I was alone. The silence afterward was worse than the attack. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, my breaths rasped. The fog leaned closer, curling around me, whispering. Voices, Becker's, begging, Alina's pleading, Kovac laughing, my mother calling my name, my squad mates shouting orders in Spanish, gunfire in the background. All of them, all at once. I pressed my palms hard over my ears, but it didn't matter. The voices weren't outside, they were inside. The fog thickened, and I realized I wasn't on the ridge anymore. I couldn't see stone, couldn't see sky, just endless black, alive with sound. And then, faint, cutting through the roar, the chop of rotor blades. I staggered forward, blinking against the mist. A red strobe blinked somewhere above, faint but real. The thrum of helicopter rotors grew louder, stronger, shoving the fog aside in violent gusts. The chopper had come. Against all odds, it was here. I stumbled toward the sound, firing 3 shots into the air to guide them. My voice tore from my throat. "Here, I'm here." The fog shrieked in reply, not with words, with rage. The ground convulsed, fissures splitting open, molten glow searing through cracks. The entity screamed louder than the rotors, rattling stone and steel alike. The helicopter hovered into view, a dark silhouette against the storm, searchlight stabbing down. I raised my arms, waving, shouting until my voice broke. The beam found me. It locked onto my face, blinding. I was saved. But then the fog rose. It coiled upward in massive tendrils, reaching, stretching, twisting into shapes almost human. Mouths opened in the mist, screaming in perfect unison. The entity surged, trying to swallow the chopper from the sky. The pilot swerved, blades slicing fog into ribbons that immediately reformed. The searchlight flickered, cut out. I ran. My boots hammered the ridge, lungs on fire, heart ready to tear free. The cliff edge loomed. The only chance. Jump or die here. Behind me, the fog roared. The ground split. Claws scraped. The voices screamed my name in every tongue I'd ever known. I jumped. For a heartbeat, I was weightless. Falling into black, rotors thundering above, the glow of lava below. A hand, human, real, caught my wrist. A soldier leaned from the chopper door, shouting over the roar. He hauled me up, dragging me inside as the helicopter banked hard away from the ridge. I collapsed on the floor, gasping, shaking, staring at the soldiers around me. They shouted questions I couldn't answer. My ears still rang with screams. I crawled to the door, looked back as we pulled away. The island writhed beneath us. Not land, not rock. A body. A face the size of mountains shifting in the fog, its mouth opening wider, wider, as though it would swallow the sea itself. And then the fog closed, hiding everything. The flight back was silent. No one spoke to me. I don't think I would have answered if they had. When we landed, they pulled me out, wrapped me in blankets, pushed water into my hands. My throat burned too badly to swallow. They asked what happened, where the others were. I couldn't tell them, because I didn't know how to explain that the island wasn't an island, that the earth itself had turned against us, that the thing down there hadn't just killed them. It had taken them, it had become them, and sometimes in the quiet, I still hear their voices calling me. I survived. That much is true. But the island, it's still out there, beneath the fog, breathing, waiting, and it knows my name. They brought me back to the mainland on a cargo flight that reeked of diesel and iron. I don't remember most of it, just shadows of faces leaning over me, the press of straps across my chest, the dull throb of engines vibrating through the cot beneath me. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a concrete room that smelled of bleach and stale coffee. A medical tent had been set up inside some kind of hangar. Floodlights buzzed overhead. Men and women in plain fatigues moved around me, clipboards in hand, faces blank as stone. The patch on their sleeves didn't belong to any branch I knew. They didn't waste time. Name: Staff Sergeant Diego Mendez. Unit: classified. Survivors? None. Their questions were rapid, mechanical, each word clipped and precise. They wanted times, coordinates, weapon reports. They wanted every detail of what happened on the ridge, what I saw, what I heard. I gave them what I could. But how do you explain fog that speaks in your mother's voice? How do you explain land that pulses like a living thing, that opens its maw to swallow men whole? When I stumbled over words, they stared harder, pens scratching. One woman tilted her head as though weighing whether I was delusional or dangerous. Finally, someone slid a recorder across the table. "Say it again," he ordered. "The part about the island, slowly this time." I repeated it, word for word. My throat burned. They listened without interruption, no flicker of disbelief, no raised eyebrows, just silence, like they'd heard it before. When I finished, the man switched off the recorder. "That'll be all for now." The next days blurred into one another. Medical exams, psych evaluations, interrogations phrased as debriefs. They never told me where I was, only that I was safe. But safety doesn't feel like this. Safety isn't waking in the middle of the night to see shadows pressing against the canvas of your tent. Safety isn't hearing voices in the ventilation system when no one's there. I didn't tell them about that. Not yet. On the fourth night, I dreamed of Becker. He stood at the foot of my cot, chest ripped open, eyes black with fog. His mouth moved soundlessly, then opened wider and wider until it wasn't Becker anymore. It was the island's maw, yawning, swallowing the room whole. I woke choking on sulfur. My sheets reeked of it. The guards outside swore they smelled nothing. I tried to focus on routine. Push-ups in the corner of the tent, notes scrawled in a small spiral notebook they allowed me. I listed weapons calibers, terrain features, tactical movements, anything to ground myself, but the fog bled into everything. I'd write 7.62 millimeter rounds and catch myself scribbling noiters. They know my name. I'd count out push-ups and hear a whisper with every number, 1, 2, 3, 4, until the whisper got ahead of me, counting faster than I could move. It was inside me now. I knew it. One afternoon, a doctor came, not one of the cold interrogators, but a man with kind eyes and a tired smile. He sat across from me, folded his hands, and said, "You're not the first soldier to survive that place." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, eyes flicking to the corners of the tent before he leaned closer. His voice dropped. "They don't want you to know, but every few years someone washes up from an island that doesn't exist on any map. Always the same story. Fog, shadows, voices. Always only one survivor." I stared, pulse hammering. "Where are the others?" He didn't answer, just pressed a pill into my hand and told me to sleep. The nightmares worsened. Sometimes I woke choking on smoke. Sometimes on salt water. Sometimes I woke to the sound of rotors overhead, the beat of helicopter blades shaking the earth, only to find the sky still and silent. Once I woke certain someone was standing outside my tent. I held my breath, listening. The canvas rippled like breath against it. A low voice whispered my name. Diego. Not Becker's voice. Not Alina's, my own. I gripped my rifle until dawn. On the 7th day, they said I was cleared for release. A black van drove me to an airfield. No insignia, no markings. The driver didn't speak. At the terminal, a man handed me a sealed envelope with my discharge papers and a plane ticket home. No medals, no commendations, just silence and dismissal. I boarded the plane, sat by the window, and watched the world fall away beneath me. For the first time in weeks, I thought maybe it was over. But then, as the plane cut through the clouds, I saw it. Far below, the ocean stretched endless and gray, and in the fog drifting over the waves, a shape writhed. Not land, not sea. Something in between, rising, sinking, breathing. The flight attendant's voice droned overhead, but I barely heard it. My hand pressed against the window, trembling. The fog shifted, and I swear I saw a face form in the clouds. A mouth. Eyes. It smiled. When I finally landed, home didn't feel like home. Streets too quiet. Lights too bright. Every shadow on every corner seemed too thick, too heavy. I walked past a construction site and froze. The ground pulsed beneath the steel beams. Just once. Subtle. No one else reacted. But I knew. Now I write everything down. Every sound. Every flicker of shadow. Every voice I hear in the silence of my apartment. Because I don't think the island stayed behind. I think it followed me. Sometimes when the fog rolls in at night, I smell sulfur in the air. My neighbors don't. The streets stay empty. But I hear footsteps in the hall outside my door, slow and heavy, dragging claws across the floor. I keep my rifle by the bed, though I know it won't help. I sleep in short bursts, dreaming of the ridge, the lava veins, the endless voices. And when I wake, I hear them whispering just beneath the surface of my thoughts, not calling me back. Not yet. Just waiting. Because the island isn't a place. It's a hunger. And now, it knows the way here.